Thank you for tuning into the second episode of Night's End, Shades Drawn, Dawn's Reckoning, the complete story of the axe-wielding maniac who terrorized the heartlands of the early 1910s. If you're new to our series, we highly encourage you to start with episode 1, where we explore the early days of the Villisca case. In this episode, we continue the story, moving beyond those beginnings of the Villisca crime and into the months and years that followed for the town. With that said, we hope you enjoy this next chapter. Disclaimer. The story you're about to hear recounts a crime of unspeakable violence. It includes graphic descriptions that may be distressing to some listeners. This podcast is dedicated to the memory of the families who never got to see another sunrise. May their names never fade and their stories never be forgotten. An excerpt from the Des Moines Register, published July 27th, 1912. Quote, "The Villisca murder is the most baffling case that I've ever known. Not a clue as to the identity of the person or persons who did the killings on June 9th has been picked up by the officers, and they are as far at sea on the case as they were the morning the bodies were discovered." End quote. M.W. McGlothry. What if I told you the loss of innocence in Villisca didn't end with the murders? What if I told you that in the days that followed, the wounds only deepened, tearing the town apart, not because its people didn't want justice, but because they couldn't agree on what justice looked like? And what if I told you that at the center of that unraveling stood a detective, manipulating the investigation for his own wealth and ego, tampering with evidence and casting doubt on the only viable suspect ever named in connection to the Villisca case? I'm Tyler Onder, the host of your show, and you're listening to episode 2 of Night's End, Shades Drawn, Dawn's Reckoning. In the weeks following the murders, the entire town of Villisca was gripped by a wave of speculation and hysteria. Mobs of townspeople began searching every abandoned barn and outhouse in the vicinity, hoping to discover a killer in hiding. Local hardware stores, such as J.B. Moore's own, quickly sold out of guns and padlocks within days. Families began forming in overnight packs, sleeping in groups at each other's homes, with someone always staying awake to keep watch in case the killer struck again. This behavior was fueled by the assumption that the murderer was a local, an idea that, while unlikely in hindsight, was widely believed at that time. At the height of the hysteria, suspicion ran rampant. Everyone seemed to be pointing fingers, and gossip spread like the plague as townspeople tried to pin the blame for the Moore and Stillinger murders. One of the earliest newspaper-worthy suspects was Joe Moore's own family member. His name was Sam Moyer, the ex-husband of Joe's sister, Anna. Sam Moyer had married Anna a few years before the murders, and their marriage was anything but sunshine and rainbows. Anna Moore would die from health issues in 1910, but the hard feelings between Joe and Sam did not stop despite that. Now, another brother to Joe Moore, Harry Moore, stated that Joe one time told him that Sam Moyer was the only enemy he ever had. Sam Moyer was eventually tracked down in Nebraska, and though not a crazy reason to believe him as a suspect, he was quickly dismissed with a foolproof alibi during the time the murders occurred. The only suspect that actually was plausible and known by the press during the early months of the investigation was a railroad worker. On the overcast morning of June 10th, 1912, just hours before the discovery of the Villisca murders, a man named Andy Sawyer appeared in the Creston, Iowa rail yard. He was tall and rough in appearance. Andy approached a railroad worker named Russ Lash, asking for a job. Lash took him to Tom Dyer, the foreman of a pile driving crew. Sawyer claimed to have experience operating steam engines, and with no reason to doubt him, Dyer hired him on the spot. A little bit after that, the small work train pulled out heading west. As it passed through Villisca between the hours of 7 and 8 a.m., no one aboard could have imagined that the small town was about to become the center of national attention. At that very hour, the bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls still lay undiscovered in their beds. By the time the crew reached their worksite near Greenfield, in a moment I picture as somewhat comedic, Dyer realized he might have made a big mistake. Andy clearly had no experience working with steam equipment. To prevent damage or injury, Dyer reassigned him to a much simpler task, sharpening the heavy wood piles used in bridge construction. It was here that Sawyer's behavior and his strange attachment to his axe began to unsettle those around him. As he worked, he spoke to the wooden piles like they were living things, warning them that he was going to chop off their heads. Of course, Sawyer might have been remembered as nothing more than a strange drifter, if not for what happened next. Late Monday afternoon, word of the Villisca murders reached Dyer's crew as they read Creston Daily newspaper in Fontanelle. Andy Sawyer's reaction was instant and unsettling. He was fascinated by the murders, talking of little else. Even more alarming, he told several of the men that he had been in Villisca the night of the killings, leaving town only because he feared of becoming a suspect. Within just 24 hours, Sawyer had completely isolated himself from the rest of the men. He sat alone during breaks, ate by himself, and refused to ride with the crew, choosing instead to ride alone on the engine or tender. But what stood out the most was his attachment to his axe. It never left his side. If he wasn't using it, he was sharpening it. And when he went to bed in the bunk car at night, some of the men swore he even took it under the covers with him. When confronted about his suspicious behavior, Andy Sawyer denied everything. He insisted that any comments he made about the Villisca murders came strictly from what he'd read in the newspapers. It was not from first-hand knowledge. He explained that he only knew details about the town because he had grown up in the area years earlier. In an effort to clear his name, Sawyer laid out his movements in the months leading up to the murders, tracing his wandering path across the Midwest. Confident they could verify his story if they ever needed to, investigators set out to retrace Sawyer's steps, determined to find out if his alibi would hold. And well, it did. Sawyer recounted on the night of the Villisca murders, Sunday, June 9th, he wasn't anywhere near Villisca. Instead, he claimed he was in Osceola, Iowa, traveling with another drifter. That night, the two were stopped by the city marshal in Osceola and given a choice: leave town on the next freight train or spend the night in jail for vagrancy. It was an easy choice for them. They chose train, boarding a westbound freight that pulled out at 10:11 p.m., eventually arriving in Creston between 3 and 4 a.m. on the morning of June 10th, just hours before Andy Sawyer would show up in the rail yard looking for work. When investigators later tracked down that same city marshal, he confirmed Sawyer's story, verifying that Sawyer and his companion had indeed been in Osceola that night and had hopped the freight out of town exactly as he'd claimed. Sawyer was cleared, and his name is now on a list as one of the more prominent early suspects of the investigation. Up to this point, you've heard the facts of the crime, how calculated it was, how eerily composed the killer seemed, and by now, it likely feels obvious. This wasn't the act of someone snapping. This was the work of a serial killer. This pattern will become even clearer in future episodes, as we move further back in time to explore earlier, eerily similar murders across the Midwest. But Villisca stands apart for one unsettling reason. There was a man in town that night. A man I've intentionally waited to mention because I wanted you to absorb every detail of the case before you heard his name. Let me tell you about the little minister. George Jacklin Kelly was born in London, England on October 19, 1878. The eldest of 4 children, little is known about his early life. But in 1904, at the age of 26, he immigrated to the United States with his wife Laura, believing he was called to serve in the Methodist Church. Between 1904 and the spring of 1912, Kelly worked at nearly 15 churches across Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. None of those assignments lasted long. He claimed it was because of poor pay, once saying, "You can starve working for the Methodists." But in truth, it was a combination of erratic behavior, poor money management, and an inability to stay rooted in one place. By May of 1912, Kelly had left the Methodist Church and enrolled with the Presbyterian Church in Omaha. That summer, he was assigned to serve 3 rural congregations, 2 of which were located northwest of Villisca. This meant that every other weekend, George Kelly was to travel to Villisca, Iowa. And on Saturday, June 8, 1912, George Kelly arrived in Villisca for the first of those weekend stays. Arrangements were made for Kelly to stay with a local family of the town for the night of June 8th. A man named Lewis Enerson met him at the depot and took him by buggy to his brother's farm, where he was to spend the night. There, Kelly met Henry and his wife, the 2 Enerson girls who were not yet of school age, and an old Norwegian grandmother. After having dinner, they all talked, but by bedtime, the Enerson adults started to get worried because of how Kelly related to the young girls. The grandmother especially was so upset that she spent the night in a rocking chair at the head of the stairs to make sure their strange guest would not try to come up to where the young girls were sleeping. She said she could hear Kelly pacing in his downstairs room late into the night. When Kelly left the Enerson residence on that Sunday morning of June 9, 1912, the grandmother exclaimed, "Don't bring that man here again. He's crazy." And on the evening of June 9th, Kelly sat in the pews of the Presbyterian Church, just one more face among many, watching the children of the town perform their songs at the annual Children's Day service. The same service the Moore family and the Stillinger girls attended. When the Children's Day service ended, Kelly walked across the church to Pastor Ewing and his wife so they could head back to the Ewing home for that night. Upon arriving at the Ewing residence, Kelly and Pastor Ewing sat in the parlor and talked for about 30 minutes before both men decided to turn in. It was around 10:45 p.m. when Kelly was shown to his room upstairs. Pastor Ewing and his wife slept outside in a tent because of Ewing's ongoing health issues. Reverend Kelly left town the next morning on the number 5 train at 5:19 a.m. We'll come back to this later, but for now, just keep in mind that this was roughly 3.5 hours before the bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters were discovered. Having been in Villisca on the night of the murders, Kelly became almost immediately and disturbingly obsessed with the case. He was known for being a man who often spat while he speaked, and now all he talked about was the murders. He begged Pastor Ewing to help him arrange a visit to the crime scene. And well, he got his wish. With the help from detectives, Kelly was allowed to walk through the Moore home in the following weekend after the murders took place, feeding what was already a clearly unhealthy fixation. Before long, his behavior caught the attention of Tom O'Leary, an investigator with the Hayes Detective Agency. O'Leary decided to write a letter to Kelly, posing as someone simply curious, asking if he had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of the murders. Kelly's response was anything but ordinary. Kelly wrote back to Tom O'Leary, claiming that he couldn't sleep, so he went for a walk on the murder night. As he passed the Moore home, he said he heard the thud of an axe. He claimed the killer had been startled by a passing couple and stepped onto the porch until they were gone. But most perplexing to me, he said that Sarah Moore reared up in bed before the killer struck her. I want you to remember what I said in the last episode about the particular blows to Mrs. Moore. This detail alone is deeply compelling. It actually had gone right over my head all the years I've been studying this case up until I started writing this episode. From that point forward, Kelly became the focus of a quiet investigation by State Attorney General George Cozen. It wasn't public, the press had no idea, but behind the scenes, a series of secret meetings took place to discuss whether the evidence they had on Kelly was enough for an arrest. In their own view as well as my own, they didn't have enough. Yet. Kelly's bizarre personality made it hard for many to believe he was capable of such a calculated massacre. A single conversation with him made it clear that he was mentally unstable. In addition to his bizarre personality, he was also a very little man. He stood at 5'2" and weighed roughly 119 pounds. Officials questioned whether he could have the physical strength or composure to silently kill 8 people in one small house. And on top of that, his work in ministry clashed with what anyone would picture this kind of killer to be. This was a crime of staggering evil. No one would expect it to come from a man of God. By the end of 1912, the investigation into Kelly quietly died down. There simply wasn't enough to move forward, and Kelly fell off the radar. Now fast forward to 1914. Kelly was living in Winter, South Dakota at this time, working as a preacher and calling himself a freelance reporter. He placed an ad in the Omaha World newspaper looking for a private secretary. Less than a week later, a woman named Jasmine Hodgson applied for the position. What she received back from Kelly was alarming. He told her she was exactly what he was looking for, but there was one condition. She would need to be comfortable typing in the nude. Jasmine was disgusted. She took the letter to the pastor at Kelly's church, who forwarded it to the authorities. Investigators used this to their advantage. They began sending fake letters to Kelly, posing as Jasmine. Each reply from Kelly became more vulgar and graphic. By the time they had enough to act, he was arrested for sending obscene material through mail. In May 1914, Kelly was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the National Mental Asylum in Washington, D.C. There he underwent months of therapy. At some point during his stay, he wrote to Attorney General Cozen, saying he feared he was going to be arrested for the Villisca murders. Cozen replied, assuring Kelly that he was not a suspect and should focus on his recovery. Cozen might not have spoken with such confidence had he known Kelly, in his mental confusion, had developed the habit of stealing pieces of meat from the hospital kitchen and hiding them in his room. Now I want you to recall the downstairs room where the Stillingers slept. There was a slab of bacon on the floor. This was a detail I was completely unaware of up until writing this monologue. It's never really talked about, and not many people know about it. That's all we'll say in regards to Kelly right now, but he'll come back into our story later in this episode. James Newton Wilkerson, an investigator with the Burns Detective Agency, stepped off the train at the Villisca Depot in the spring of 1914. By this point, the people of Villisca were bracing for the worst, the possibility that the murders would fade into history as an unsolved and haunting mystery. Wilkerson was a tall and handsome man in his mid-40s, with a presence that matched the kind of charisma you often see in fictional detectives. When he was assigned to the case, he arrived in town with a very specific plan. He would spend his first month at Villisca working undercover, quietly observing and gathering information before making his move. He never saw the crime scene and knew very little of it beforehand, so he felt the undercover tactic was the easiest way to get all the information he needed without raising any eyebrows from locals. The earliest people in Villisca to eventually know of Wilkerson's true reason for being there were the families of the Moore and Stillinger victims. Until he actually went public down the line, he introduced himself to everyone as a land agent from Texas, claiming he was in town to sell property. He spent his first month delivering the same pitch to locals all over town. But once the land talk was out of the way, Wilkerson would ease the conversation toward the real reason he was there: the murders. Doing this allowed him to gather the town's theories, rumors, and suspicions, all while coming across as nothing more than a curious real estate man intrigued by a case that had captured national attention 2 years prior. One name kept coming up over and over again, always mentioned in connection to a long and bitter history with Joe Moore. That name was Frank Fernando Jones, and at that moment, Wilkerson knew exactly who he was going to build his case around. Frank Fernando Jones was born August 25, 1855, in Steuben County, New York. In his earliest days of his academics, he immediately showed signs of brilliance and eagerness to make something of himself. His family moved to Illinois in 1863, and then to Iowa in 1875. Jones went on to get a high school diploma, and from there began teaching at the ripe age of 18. He taught for several years, and along with that, was a Sunday school teacher and a bookkeeper at a large hardware chain that had a location in Villisca. He eventually gave up teaching in the classroom as he felt he wanted to make more of a name for himself. Rifled with determination, Frank remained a bookkeeper for the implement chain for 7 years before he decided to take a leap and start a business on his own account. His self-belief was proven by his successful launch of the Jones store, where farming equipment and agricultural products were sold. Along with this, he was also working as a manager of the Villisca National Bank. Now into the early 1900s, Jones began a political career. His knowledge and known reputation as a self-made businessman was what won him the election as an Iowa state senator in early 1912. You are probably asking, why am I sharing all these seemingly minute details with you? How does this add to our story? Well, it gives you an idea of who the man that Wilkerson was targeting was. Jones was not just successful in business. He was one of the more prominent self-made citizens within the Villisca community. And now you may be wondering, why was Jones thought of as a suspect to the Moore and Stillinger murders? Well, I will give you 2 reasons as to why locals felt he was a suspect from the very beginning. The father of the murdered Moore family, Joe Moore, began working for Jones's implement store in 1904. Josiah became a big component in the business's early success. He was a very gifted salesman and was by far the most successful worker under Frank Jones's business when it came to his ambition and sales. Josiah's reputation grew exponentially the few years he worked for Jones. He was loved by townspeople and thought he could grow more by leaving the Jones store and starting his own implement business. Once he began his own store, he had a hefty amount of once loyal customers to the Jones store follow him. Competition was at an all-time high now, and Jones was now competing with a man he once considered his best employee. Not only did he take customers, though, he took the John Deere Plow Company franchise with him when he left the Joneses' employment. In fact, the company secretly backed Moore because they felt Jones was not pushing their products as he should. But that was just one of 2 reasons as to why people thought Jones was in on the murders. The other reason was still a huge stretch, but it was a slightest bit more rational to think of him as a suspect. Frank Jones had a daughter-in-law named Donna, who was married to his son, Albert Jones. Donna was quite a looker for the time period, and many people had the idea she had been sneaking around with other men while married to Albert Jones. Rumors of Donna's infidelity were widely circulated at the time, and they were strongly supported by reports from the town's telephone operators. During that era, operators would often overhear conversations after manually connecting callers. According to these accounts, Donna was allegedly making clandestine arrangements with several different men in the years leading up to and including the period of the murders. One of those men was rumored to be Joe Moore himself. For James Wilkerson, this combination of motives was what he needed to implicate Frank Fernando Jones as the man who had orchestrated the murder of the Moore family. The narrative he constructed suggested that Jones, enraged by Moore's professional rivalry and the alleged affair with his daughter-in-law, had hired someone to eliminate Joe and his household. Wilkerson's first step in advancing this theory was to identify a suspect he could frame as the hired killer, a so-called hitman employed by F.F. Jones. His method for doing so was, by modern standards, both unethical and implausible. On July 7, 1914, in Blue Island, Illinois, 4 people were murdered in a small house, all killed with an axe. Among the victims were a woman, Mrs. Martha Mansfield, and her infant child. Martha's husband, William, was said to have deserted her a year prior to the murders, and he was suspected of the Blue Island murders the very moment they were discovered. However, when Mansfield was finally found by authorities in Milwaukee, he was able to provide a foolproof alibi that he was completely out of state when the Blue Island murders had occurred. This murder garnered a great deal of attention and eventually made its way into the Villisca Review. Wilkerson wasted no time. He traveled to Blue Island and immediately concluded the Blue Island murders were identical to the Villisca murders. To save time, I'll skip over the specific differences between the cases. Just know they were different in a variety of ways. After making his false claim about the murders being identical, Wilkerson quickly learned that William Mansfield had been considered an early suspect in the Blue Island case. Despite Mansfield having a foolproof alibi that clearly demonstrated he was not in Illinois at the time of the murders, Wilkerson ignored this evidence. He needed a suspect, and facts were irrelevant so long as he could bend the situation to fit his narrative of the Villisca case. To Wilkerson, William Mansfield was the perfect man to frame. He had previously deserted the Navy, which had brought him in legal trouble, and later abandoned his wife and baby. Details that made Wilkerson feel he was the ideal candidate to portray as a hitman for hire. Stagnation followed this development for 2 years, until 1916, when Wilkerson finally went public, claiming the Villisca murders had been solved. With the help of a reporter named Jack Boyle, they portrayed Mansfield as an irredeemable man, assigning him the sinister nickname, Insane Blackie Mansfield. The duo published a prominent headline story in the Kansas City Post, summarizing all of the so-called work Wilkerson had done since his arrival in Villisca in 1914, to prove that F.F. Jones had hired William Blackie Mansfield to murder the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters. The article, written by Jack Boyle, connected Mansfield not only to the Villisca and Blue Island murders, but also to a murder in Kansas, a case we will examine in due time. In doing so, Boyle and Wilkerson fully villainized Mansfield. This newspaper article would forever change how history remembered him. The paper depicted Mansfield as an army-deserting, axe-murdering cocaine fiend. However, the latter two of these accusations have since been proven false when examined against the available documents and records. Wilkerson finally discovered Mansfield's whereabouts after receiving a tip from a reader of the Kansas City Post. In 1916, William Mansfield was working at the Cochran packing plant in Kansas City. Acting on the lead, Wilkerson located him and approached him directly at his place of employment on June 13, 1916. The self-styled but fraudulent detective greeted him with a theatrical, "Hello, insane Blackie." Mansfield was then informed that he was being taken to the police station for interrogation. Ironically, Mansfield assumed he was being arrested for abandoning his wife. He had no idea he was being implicated in the Villisca axe murders. In fact, I would argue he might not have ever even heard of the small town of Villisca, Iowa. But to Wilkerson, that didn't matter. Blackie was going to fit the narrative, whether he liked it or not. What followed for William Mansfield was a night of hell. Once taken into police custody and brought to the interrogation room, he was physically beaten, denied water to the point of severe thirst, and subjected to relentless verbal abuse throughout the night by James Wilkerson. The detective did everything in his power to force a confession, resorting to both physical and psychological coercion. But Mansfield, bewildered and overwhelmed, responded not with guilt, but with confusion. He had no idea why he was being treated this way. Wilkerson's accusations made little sense to him, and yet the brutality continued, as if the detective believed that sheer force could turn suspicion into fact. By the next morning, William Mansfield was suffering from significant injuries, including severe bruising and damage to his ribcage from the beatings he had endured throughout the night. In the days following the interrogation, a series of legal proceedings began to unfold. On July 10, 1916, William Blackie Mansfield was taken to the Red Oak County Jail, where he awaited a grand jury hearing to determine whether there was sufficient evidence to bind him over as a perpetrator of the Villisca axe murders. Unsurprisingly, the grand jury proved to be fair and just, quite the contrast to Detective Wilkerson. The witnesses Wilkerson presented in support of his theory were not individuals of reputable standing. Many had questionable backgrounds, and the statements he obtained from them were secured through manipulation and coercion. Pay stubs were presented to the grand jury by Mansfield's attorney, and they proved to be the final blow to Wilkerson's case. The documents confirmed that William Mansfield had been in continuous employment in Montgomery, Illinois, both before and after the crucial date of June 9, 1912. These records solidified his alibi, and, ultimately, his innocence. It did not take the jury long to reach a verdict. William Mansfield had absolutely nothing to do with the Villisca murders. He was released from custody on July 21, 1916, leaving Villisca in his wake, along with a false narrative that, astonishingly, continues to be believed by some to this day. It can be easily assumed that F.F. Jones felt a brief moment of vindication and relief when Mansfield was cleared. For a short time, he believed that Wilkerson's case had finally been exposed for what it was, baseless and inflammatory. He hoped this moment would allow him to return to public life with the image of the man he truly was, a businessman committed to providing for the community of Villisca, not someone capable of hiring a killer to commit mass murder on such flimsy motives. Unbeknownst to Jones, Wilkerson wasn't finished. The Burns Detective Agency even dropped him after how lousy and unethical they found him to be with the case. Instead of conceding defeat, the detective pivoted, accusing Jones of paying off authorities and claiming that the entire affair was a vast conspiracy designed to protect the senator and let him get away with murder. What followed was a legal battle. Jones filed a slander suit against the relentless Wilkerson, arguing that his reputation had been permanently damaged by the detective's fabricated allegations. And in hindsight, Jones was right. His political career was effectively destroyed, derailed by the false image Wilkerson had painted of him. The peak of his business success would never return after the Mansfield charade either. But even this legal effort wasn't enough. Jones was unable to win the suit against the cunning and deeply manipulative Wilkerson. Frank Fernando Jones had passed away at the age of 86 on January 29, 1941. He maintained his innocence until the very end, insisting that he had been unjustly framed for the murders of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters. It's one of the most tragic aspects of this case today, the reputational ruin of both Mansfield and Jones. Now, it is true, Mansfield was far from a saint, but the notion that he was the embodiment of evil has never been proven, nor has it ever been supported by credible evidence. As for Jones, his contributions to Villisca were substantial. He played a significant role in the town's development, and held influence as a state senator within the Republican Party. And yet, despite all of this, both men are most remembered for their alleged connection to the Villisca murders. Many first-time readers of the case walk away with the belief that these two men got away with the most despicable crime imaginable. After the long and exhausting legal battles, the jury had finally reached the end of their patience with the elaborate conspiracies constructed by James Wilkerson. One man, who had originally supported Wilkerson's movement prior to the legal proceedings and even served on the jury, later stated, "You men had no case. I could do nothing else but vote as I did." Even after this complete failure, Wilkerson refused to back down. He continued rallying large meetings with his loyal supporters. Funding continued to pour in from those who still could not, or would not, see through his deception. Deep down, Wilkerson knew exactly what he was doing. With no true bill returned against either Wilkerson or Jones, the jury was ready to change direction. In April of 1917, they sought a suspect whose case had real substance, one rooted in credibility rather than conjecture. That's when they turned their attention back to the man whose behavior after the 1912 murders had never quite sat right with anyone who knew the basics of the situation: George Jacklin Kelly. This is the part of the monologue where things start to become a real head-scratcher, because the elements I haven't yet mentioned to support the case against George Kelly are nothing short of astonishing, and together, they make it entirely possible that he was the man who took the lives of 8 sleeping victims in the small white house on 508 East 2nd Street. Before the jury was confident to return a true bill of indictment for trial against Kelly for first-degree murder, they needed a bit more insight into his character and past. That's when Horace Havner, the newly appointed Attorney General of Iowa, stepped in. Havner had been convinced from the very beginning that Kelly was responsible for the murders. Everything mentioned earlier in the monologue about the little minister was, in his eyes, more than enough to begin connecting the dots. Havner was going to do whatever it took to convince the jury to proceed. The first element of evidence that Horace Havner presented to the grand jury in the case against George Kelly was his bloody shirt. Several employees who worked at Bluff City Laundry in Council Bluffs, Iowa, were called to testify. They had previously been interviewed by authorities in late June 1912 and recounted the same story to the grand jury. Each employee's testimony was the exact same, explaining that a shirt had arrived at the laundry in an unusual way. Rather than being shipped with the regular Macedonia, Iowa delivery, it was wrapped in a bundle with other clothing and shoved through the building's mail slot. The bundle was labeled 33 cents, with no return address on it. Upon opening the bundle, employees found men's underwear and a white shirt stained with a substantial amount of blood on it. After the staff had failed to completely remove the stains, they simply returned the bundle to Macedonia, where Billy Miller, the druggist who handled the laundry pickup, waited to see who would call for the bundle. Less than a week later, little George came into the laundromat and claimed the previously unidentified shirt. Although employees couldn't recall the exact date in June it was cleaned, the event was 100% confirmed in the building's laundry record to have occurred the week after the Villisca murders. The second element of evidence presented to the grand jury in the case against Reverend Kelly was his window-peeping tendencies. If you recall last episode, the body of Lena Stillinger in the downstairs bedroom makes a strong case for the murders being motivated by lustful desires. Havner presented Kelly's sexual deviance to the explanation of Kelly's voyeurism, making the argument that Kelly had murdered everyone inside the Moore home so he could pose and look at the naked body of Lena Stillinger. To make this argument a strong possibility, the state recalled Billy Miller, funny enough, of laundry fame to the stand. Billy Miller recounted that the event he was about to tell occurred in May of 1912. He was in his living room around 10:15 p.m. when he heard soft footsteps moving along the north side of his home. At first, he thought nothing of it. His home was right next to a vacant lot, and it was often an occurrence that people would cut through the lot to get to their destination. But what caught his attention about these footfalls was that they suddenly stopped right when they reached the back of his house. Billy quickly looked out his parlor window and saw a tiny man standing in the shadows just outside the glimmer of light casted out from the back bedroom window. In the back bedroom, Billy's wife was preparing for bed. Adrenaline kicked in as Billy shouted, "Get out of here, you son of a bitch!" Startled, the little person made a run for it. Billy's shouts aroused a neighbor, and the neighbor also got a look at the little person before being able to evade into the night. Both Billy and his neighbor were in disbelief. They realized that the little man was none other than their new minister, Reverend Kelly. One more element presented to the jury involving Kelly's deviancy took place in 1915 in Sutton, Nebraska, where he was assigned to preach. He lasted there until April of 1917, but willingly resigned after his constant psychotic behavior, which led him to be hated. In those 2 years located in Sutton, he was supposedly caught window peeping on various occasions, prowling late at night, and talking obsessively about the Villisca murders. He was even the suspect of arson on 2 separate occasions. Kelly's own doctor in town was fearful of him, quoting in a letter to officials that everyone in Sutton was afraid. After Horace Habner presented all of this information, the decision was placed in the hands of the grand jury. They had to determine whether the evidence they'd heard provided sufficient suspicion of guilt to bind Reverend Kelly over for trial. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on April 30th, 1917, just as their term was about to end, the jury returned a true bill of indictment against George Jacklin Kelly for first-degree murder. Kelly left preaching in Sutton, Nebraska in February of 1917. So when the jury returned the true bill on April 30th, 1917, authorities had some difficulty locating where Kelly was living, as he had left Sutton months earlier. Armed with a bench warrant for his arrest, they followed every lead available in an attempt to track him down. Interestingly, a man in Villisca who knew of Kelly's whereabouts was the fraudulent figure of James Wilkerson. Now trying to twist the Kelly indictment to support his now disproven theory about F.F. Jones, Wilkerson traveled to Kelly's then unknown location, Alto Pass, Illinois. When Wilkerson arrived in Alto Pass, he told Reverend Kelly that he and his wife, Laura Kelly, needed to get to Chicago immediately, where he had already arranged a hotel room for them to hide. He helped the couple pack, and soon after, a driver picked them up and took them to Chicago. Wilkerson, meanwhile, stayed behind and used Southern Express to bill a consignment of Kelly's belongings to Kansas City. He identified himself to the express agent as F.F. Jones and asked that the shipment be billed to Orrin Jackson, the sheriff of Montgomery County during the time of the Villisca murders. It's believed Wilkerson used Jones's name deliberately, hoping people in Villisca would start to question, why would F.F. Jones help this man unless he had something to hide? In the end, the plan didn't work out in Wilkerson's favor. Once in Chicago, Reverend Kelly and his wife Laura were contacted by Kelly's actual legal team, who advised him to go to Villisca and turn himself in. The little minister did exactly that. On Monday, May 14, 1917, he surrendered to the authorities and was placed in Harrison County Jail in Logan City, Iowa, without bond. I could have left this part out, but I wanted to reinforce the relentless nature of Wilkerson and his crooked tactics in framing F.F. Jones. They did not stop once Kelly took the spotlight as an actual damning suspect. He always remained in the background, pathetically trying to manipulate the investigation, even during the Kelly trials. Okay, we're soon to be in the final stretch before the short discussion half of this episode. Let us keep going. While the Reverend was in jail awaiting trial, he spent a lot of time with County Attorney of Montgomery County, Oscar Winstrand. This gave Oscar an opportunity to get to know a lot about Kelly's character, and he was impressed by just how loyal Laura Kelly was to her husband. He had a dynamic of friendship built with the little minister, all while taking note of any self-incriminating evidence that could continue to build on Kelly's case. One of these instances came a few weeks into Kelly's time in jail. Oscar asked Kelly if he would like some exercise. Kelly eagerly agreed, and the two men went outside behind the jail. Oscar pointed to a woodpile and asked if Kelly would like to chop some of the wood. Excitedly, Kelly took the axe and began trying to split each log. Wenstron did this for underlying motives. The little minister fell to his own folly. Wenstron noted that Kelly was swinging the axe left-handed. This supports M.W. McGlaughley's analysis of the crime scene shortly after the murders had occurred. The axe marks indicated it was almost certain that the murderer was a left-handed person, another piece of circumstantial evidence. And at last, the final event of all this was the confession the minister made shortly before his trial. Horace Havner felt it was worth one last attempt to try and get a confession out of the little man to further solidify his case as the Villisca murderer. On August 30th, 1917, George Kelly was transported to the sheriff's office in Harrison County Police Station. Havner and 3 other men were in the office with Kelly as they pressured him to confess to the murders. This went on for nearly 2 hours, but to no avail. Kelly was returned to his cell at approximately 10 p.m. that night. A couple of hours later, in the first hour of August 31st, Kelly was sobbing and reacting freaked out to any small sounds made. He caught the attention of the sheriff and began pleading that the sheriff would promise that he would be sent to an asylum rather than hanged. This led the sheriff to escort Kelly to his back office once again for a second meeting with Havner. There in his wrinkled suit and collarless shirt, Kelly was extremely nervous. Throughout the entirety of the second grilling, Kelly's eyes were constantly shifting focus on each of the 4 men trying to get him to confess. Sobbing parts of the time, his voice often shifted from high to low. This attempt failed as well. They got nothing related to the Villisca murder, but Kelly repeatedly confessed to setting the Sutton, Nebraska fires. His tormentors dismissed this as unimportant, directing him to confess that he was the Villisca murderer. But at 5:30 a.m., George Kelly was brought back into the sheriff's office with a confession. The summary of this confession followed. Kelly claimed that on the night of June 9th, he had been staying at the Ewing's house in the upstairs bedroom. Feeling restless, he decided to get out of bed and go for a walk. He left the Ewing home through the front door and made his way across the Presbyterian church lot. During his entire walk through the dark Villisca night, his mind was occupied with planning a sermon titled, "Slay Utterly." The phrase, drawn from the Bible, appears in the book of Ezekiel. The verse I think he was most likely referencing reads, "Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, and women. But come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." Ezekiel 9, verse 6, KJV. The historical context of that passage portrays a divine judgment so severe it called for the destruction of nearly everyone in Jerusalem, after hundreds of years of repeated disobedience of God's laws. From the Presbyterian lot, Kelly claimed he walked down the street until he saw a shadow cast along the side of the Moore home. With the sermon idea still swirling in his mind, he felt compelled to follow the shadow figure and see where it led. According to Kelly, the shadow moved toward the back of the house, and although he lost track of it, he then stumbled upon an axe. At that moment, he claimed to hear a voice say, "Go in, do as I say, slay utterly." Though unaware of who lived in the house, Kelly said he responded to the voice, "Yes, Lord, I will." He added that the house was pitch black when he entered the parlor. Hearing a second voice command, "Come up higher," he passed a room where 2 children were sleeping and entered the kitchen. Then, ascending the stairs, which he claimed he believed to be Jacob's ladder, he heard yet another voice say, "Suffer the children to come on to me." To this, Kelly said he replied, "They are coming, Lord." Finding himself in the bedroom of the 4 more children, he stated that he repeatedly struck each of them with the axe. He then exited the room and attacked the Moore parents, all the while claiming he was driven by an impulse beyond his control. Afterward, he went downstairs and attempted to rest, but the voice returned, saying, "More work yet." Before realizing it, he was in the room where the Stillinger sisters slept, and he continued what he referred to as his sacrifice. To the best of his recollection, Kelly claimed he left the axe inside the house and returned to the Ewing home, eventually departing town at 5:19 a.m. on the number 5 train. That marked the end of the confession, one that would lead directly to his trial. On September 4th, 1917, the first trial of George Jacklin Kelly began. Entering the courtroom with his much taller wife, Laura, by his side, he appeared visibly skittish and nervous as he gazed around the room at the overwhelming number of people. Dressed in a gray coat and blue trousers, he made his way to his seat and shook hands with his defense team, as well as the crooked Wilkerson who sat with them. I'm going to highlight only the details I haven't told you about during the trial, as most of what you already heard was what was being legally presented. 4 days into the trial, on September 14th, was, I believe, the most important day in supporting the guilt of George Jacklin Kelly. Several citizens of Macedonia, Iowa were called to the stand, testifying that Kelly spoke of the Villisca murders before the bodies had even been discovered. Now remember, Kelly left Villisca on the number 5 train at 5:19 a.m. on June 10, 1912. The train took him back to Macedonia, where he arrived at 7:18 a.m. Barnett, who worked as a carpenter, was the state's primary witness to this early knowledge. He claimed that Kelly was coming up the street from the depot when they met at the front of a hardware store. Kelly apparently said, "An awful crime was committed in Villisca last night." He went on to tell Barnett that he had been at the Moore house that night because he was unable to sleep. He said he was standing on the upstairs porch at the Presbyterian manse when he heard the thud of the axe. Barnett was sure this conversation had occurred between 7:15 a.m. and 8 a.m. on June 10, 1912, and it was supported by the train timetables as well. Barnett's memory was still quite fuzzy, though. He had a couple of mix-ups during cross-examination by the defense when he told of how long he had known Kelly prior to these events. This made the jury question if he had mixed up this occurrence with the later date. After all, the murders are pretty much all Kelly talked about. But regardless, he was not the only one claiming Kelly had talked before the murders were discovered. Mr. and Mrs. William Simons were an elderly couple that were then called to the stand. Residing in Carson, Iowa, they had spent the weekend in June of 1912 in Sidney, Iowa. Coincidentally, they left Sidney to return home on a Monday morning, heading north on a CB&Q local. They reached the main line at Red Oak when they stopped and made connections with the number 5 train. Right before they resumed their journey to Carson, the little minister had stepped out of the number 5 train and entered their train. He sat down across the aisle, which was one seat behind the elderly couple. They both stated, "He appeared to be very excited, gave us staring glances, gesturing with his hands. He was just wild and talked in a loud voice. He was talking about this murder. He wanted to be put on the case, to work on it as a detective." This testimony would be the icing on the cake if it was confirmed to have occurred on June 10, 1912. It would have been explaining events that happened as the train picked up traveling north between 6 and 7 a.m., which is more than an hour before the murders were discovered. This would prove either Kelly was the killer, or he was outside the house and peeking through the windows as the murders took place. The state tried desperately to fix the date that these events took place to have been on June 10, 1912. Although the Simonses were confident it was June 10th, they weren't willing to confirm it was in case of the slightest mix-up. However, they assured the jury that it was no doubt in early June. Despite being unable to personally confirm the date of which their testimony occurred, H.P. Rea, who was a ticket agent in Hastings, Iowa at the time of the murders, was called to the stand. His records from June 10, 1912, showed that he sold 12 tickets for the northbound local that morning. 7 of them were for Henderson, Iowa. 1 was for Macedonia, Iowa, which was Kelly's, and 4 to Carson, Iowa, 2 of which most likely being the Simonses. In my personal judgment, that tells me without a doubt that these events happened on June 10, 1912. But regardless, combining it with all of the evidence and the Barnett testimony, one little moment of not being able to get personal confirmation from the Simonses on a date does not throw away the fact that this is stacked up with many other aspects that support Kelly's guilt. This was the final piece of evidence you hadn't yet heard leading up to the trial. Now let me sum up the rest for you. Kelly's first trial resulted in a hung jury. 11 jurors found him to be innocent, but 1 juror refused to believe he wasn't the killer. The jury pushed, debated, and tried everything they could to convince the lone holdout to change his mind, but it was all in vain. A second trial was ordered. That second trial was far less sensational. It was essentially a replay of the first, with no new evidence presented and nothing added for or against Kelly's guilt. It concluded on November 24th, 1917, with a final verdict: not guilty. From there, Kelly went on to live a life under the radar. His wife Laura passed away of natural causes in 1947 at 80 years old. Kelly found himself lost, but without her, it was multiplied. Winding up in a mental asylum, he died on April 6, 1957, from health-related issues, taking what he knew of the Villisca murders, even just to some extent, to the grave with him. It's easy to assume that George Jacklin Kelly would have been convicted for the June 9, 1912 massacre had it not been for the deceitful actions of James Newton Wilkerson. From the moment he stepped off the train and onto the Villisca depot in the spring of 1914, Wilkerson forever tarnished the potential for this case to be solved. His relentless persistence, even after F.F. Jones's failed slander suit, caused many to fear speaking out, lest they damage their own reputations. Wilkerson still had a loyal base of brainwashed, though innocent, supporters. His rallies and meetings continued even during Kelly's trials. In fact, his influence was the primary factor that resulted in a hung jury. Thousands of men have been convicted on far less evidence than what supported Kelly's guilt. So, where does this leave us? Well, either Kelly was the killer, or it was the work of a serial murderer. But in my personal judgment, Kelly was involved in some way. In Dr. Ed Epperly's book, Fiend Incarnate, he puts it well. Quote, "More than one student of the crime has speculated on the probability that two strangers, one sick enough to be the Villisca killer and the other being the bizarre preacher Kelly, would by chance be in the same small town during the same night. Easier perhaps to assume Kelly, who they knew was there, was the killer." End quote. Over the years of studying the case, I've gone back and forth. But one thing I'll say is that Kelly was involved. That is a statement that I would die on a hill believing if it came to it. He was either the killer himself, or he was out walking late at night and saw the killer in some way. Perhaps through a window as he passed the Moore home, or, more likely, entering or leaving the Moore property and then snuck inside after the murders had taken place. He may have been the one who locked up the house on his way out and covered the downstairs mirror. But wait, I know what you're already thinking. Well, what if Kelly was actually the serial killer responsible for all the other axe murders, including Villisca? That's certainly possible. After all, he was constantly moving and preaching across the Midwest. And everyone who has studied this case has thought about that as well. But here's my personal problem with that theory. Why wasn't Kelly obsessively talking about the other murders the way he talked about Villisca? He never even talked about the other ones. He spoke of the Villisca murders endlessly, right up to his trial. It was a fixation. If he had committed the other murders, it is hard to believe he would have been able to keep his obsessive behavior hidden. Even Horace Habner tried to link Kelly to the other crimes, but had no success. And many other researchers and students of this case have tried as well. I find myself doing it from time to time. If, by chance, we ever find a record placing Kelly in one of the other murder towns at the same time those crimes were committed, I believe that will be the only way I'd ever find peace in knowing who swung the axe in Villisca on June 9th, 1912. We have spent a lot of time on this monologue, and even then, I had to leave out countless details that add even more depth to this story. For the sake of time and getting this episode out before the year 2050, I hope you understand. If you're interested in digging deeper, I highly recommend Ed Epperly's book on the case. It's truly all you need to uncover the full story, including every detail left out of today's episode. Now it's time to move on to our short discussion segment with a brand new guest. But wait, before you do, make sure your property is free of prowlers and your blinds are shut, because you never know who could be peeping inside your home. There you go. Now I see you.
There we go. All right.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Let me just make sure I'm recording because I don't want to. All right. So before we get into this, we'll probably have to. There's going to be I think it might be 40 minutes. We'll have to make another call.
Okay.
Just that's like the free version. But
Okay.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Obviously
Yes.
it's very exciting considering I don't think anyone's ever really spoke to you. In regards to, like a podcast type thing.
Right.
That's one of the things I was very excited about bringing you on. Uh, and yeah, just tell me a little bit, like, tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, how your interest in the case and, why you got started.
Okay. Well, first of all, my son is with me today. He did not want to go to his kids club thing, so he's kind of hanging around. So you might see him in the background here a little bit.
Oh my God, yeah, you're fine.
Uh, so anyway, about myself, like I said, I was born and raised in Pella, Iowa, small town. I was a jailer for a few years, or actually not a few years, just for a year, and then became a cop in 2012 with Knoxville, Iowa Police Department, and then went on to be with the Pleasantville Police Department here in Iowa. So
Okay, cool, cool.
yeah,
Like,
so a total of 13 years now. So
so what got you interested in like Villisca specifically though? Like, when did you first hear about it, and like kind of how did you develop into, researching and, stuff like that?
I it was back in about 2017. I heard about it. I've always known about it, but I for some reason in 2017 it really captivated me. So I said, I'm going to go down there and check it out. And pretty much from 2017 on, I've just been, yeah, it's just a fascinating case.
Yeah, it truly is. And I mean, the I always say with Villisca, specifically the monologue heard in the first bit, uh, it's one of those things where it's you could have made with how crooked the detective work was, and with Wilkerson, and I mean this could have been a Netflix show with like a kind of like the Fugitive type thing with Frank Jones. I
Yep.
mean,
Oh, 100%.
I mean this was a guy that was pretty much picked out, like he was. It's always funny too because you hear about, the day of the murders. He pretty much knew he was probably. Uh, I like to think he maybe knew that he would be facing a lot of controversy from that point forward.
Yep. Yep. They had a lot of problems between each other. And again, if you're looking for a reason or a suspect or a motive, that was
Well,
the kind of
yeah,
perfect motive.
and that's the saddest part. I mean, it's like a first time listener will look at it, and I remember when I first started researching the case, specifically with Frank Jones. I was like, oh, this guy did it. And then, but then you're like, it
Yeah.
doesn't take much longer to be like,
Yeah.
okay. But yeah, crime happens. Um, and immediately towns in hysteria. Uh, Guns, padlocks are selling out. I actually have here. It was such a long monologue. It wasn't like my last one where it was like 20 minutes that I had to like, I couldn't memorize it. I had to like have this with me,
Right.
to touch on. And obviously, we see this in a lot of cases. The first, links to cases. I don't know if you've done any like have you done any like crime scene work per
Uh,
se?
Not really crime scene work. I mean, we deal with, unattended deaths, people that
Yeah.
pass away in their homes, stuff like that. We treat it as a crime scene, but do we really
Yeah. No, I
process
got
it?
you.
Like, no. But yeah.
Yeah. Mass hysteria. And I don't know if you I don't know if you recall the first like big lead was Andy Sawyer. Andy Sawyer. That
Yeah.
was
Right.
the first big lead.
Mhm.
And what's funny is, this house, the Villisca house in particular is uh obviously haunted people. That's kind of why this case really blew up. And I remember there was a show, and what's funny is every time I hear from these like guys that have been in the house, you're getting names left and right of locals that lived in Villisca. Who did the murder? That's the big, grand question.
Mhm.
You're getting names left and right, and Andy Sawyer is one of those names. And he always struck me as someone, I mean, that's the thing with Villisca. There's so many people that kind of like fit, like, I mean, out of so many people in terms of, there's only like three that I could say: Andy Sawyer and Kelly. I guess there was only two,
Yeah.
but out of the other axe murders that were happening at that time, this was the only case where it had like suspicious figures that, were being, that could make a case for. I mean, that's where it's going to be. This show is going to be interesting when we go back to Monmouth, because it's not a whole lot's there after the murder. I mean, and with Villisca, there was two interesting figures. Andy Sawyer was definitely, if it wasn't for that testimony, I mean, from the sheriff, he would probably be looked at more as somebody that was. I mean, who sleeps with an axe?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely odd behavior.
yeah, for sure.
Not normal.
not normal in the slightest.
Yeah.
But yeah, just wanted to get through that. Detective Wilkerson, before we bring up the little minister, because that's where this conversation's really going to flow well. I've talked to you on the phone a lot, and we could have had a podcast right then and there
Yeah,
about him. Uh,
absolutely.
but Detective Wilkerson, he comes into town 1914. Frank Fernando Jones, I mean, in terms of detective work, are there guys out there in the force like this that still exist today? Like in terms of, I mean, I don't know if you've heard about Wilkerson and Nellie Byers.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, to all the viewers, this was another case I did not mention. He framed a guy that was, but in this specific Nellie Byers case that he was assigned to, he completely like it was solved, and he was trying to like twist it back to being unsolved to frame his
Right.
suspect for money. I mean, so this dude was crooked. That's like all you need to know. It wasn't even just Villisca. The good thing is we usually don't see this happen too much anymore, right?
Yeah. Anymore, I mean, law enforcement now today is way more professional than what it used to be back in 1912. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
there's everything from like the good old boy system to, everyone had the kind of ran things the way they wanted to, independent police departments, stuff like that. Today, you see a lot less of that. Is there corruption and bad officers out there, bad investigators? Absolutely. But overall, everything's done by a standard.
Yeah.
Everyone's state certified and um, yeah, I mean it's just not as prevalent as it was back then. I'm sure back then there was a lot of that, not just with Wilkerson, but with a lot of other investigators, officers, stuff like that. But today you don't see much of that. No.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I kind of knew the answer to that question, but I wanted to get a more thorough breakdown to help
Yeah,
understand the
everyone that I
differentiation.
work with, as far as investigators, detectives, stuff like that, all great bunch of guys. So,
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome.
yep,
Wilkerson, he comes into this town. He poses as a land agent trying to sell land, Texas land, to locals. And here's rumors. I mean, in a way, it's almost like if he put so much work into being a phony detective, imagine if he put work into actually being a viable one. Because he had a
right,
good plan here. I mean, this was a guy
yep,
that he had the game plan. Like he knew he was going in not for the right purpose. And just like with Nellie Byers, which I said in the monologue to the viewers that this was there was a 2 year gap from 1914 when he first set into town until he went back and then like went public with Jones. That 2 year gap, that was a lot of that was Nellie Byers when he was sent to Kansas City, or I think it was just Kansas. I forget where it was exactly. He was assigned to Villisca, took a break, went out to Kansas for Nellie Byers, and then came back, and that's when he went public with Jones. And what's funny is we have William Mansfield. Lance, I'm gonna tell you, dude. I not that this Mansfield was far from a good guy,
right,
but it's pretty nuts. There will be people that study the Villisca case, and they'll realize Mansfield had nothing to do with it, but
yeah,
they'll still think he was the Blue Island killer, which is what Wilkerson used to link Mansfield to the crime.
yeah,
And that Blue Island murder was solved. It was a Kolensko, his name was somebody. There was a farmhand that was just crazy. It's been theorized maybe he was the Villisca guy. Maybe he was the guy wiping out families left and right. He's looked at now as a murderer. Like you look him up online, and the first thing he'll be linked to is, I mean, like Villisca. Other than working for the Union, he didn't amount to much like Jones. He didn't have much on his resume. Jones, has state senator under his belt. This dude is only remembered for these murders. And in the way that Wilkerson linked him, I don't even know if you're aware of this, and this is why I wanted to bring you on. You're not as uh, Ed's just nuts. Ed Epperly makes me laugh because
hmm, yeah.
he is a human Wikipedia on this case. I mean,
Yeah,
the
and
whole
again, I just want to give a shout out to him for all the work that he's done
oh,
because
it's
without him, we probably wouldn't even be talking.
no. I
That
mean,
his book is like the holy Bible to
the Villisca case,
absolutely.
absolutely. So the way Wilkerson framed Mansfield, I didn't say it in the monologue, but it's in his book. Like the way he got these testimonies from people to try to put Mansfield on trial as the Villisca killer is he. And I chose not to put this in the manuscript just because it's such a ridiculous story. Like it ticks me off.
Yeah,
He used a woman, or he sent like a fortune teller to her house because she wouldn't say her secrets of what she knew about the case. He uses a fortune teller, a fake one. I think the person worked at a saloon or something. He's like, yeah, go to this person, tell her that you're a fortune teller and that you need to tell somebody who's tried to get secrets out of you. You need to tell them your secret. He probably works in the force, this person. So this person goes, "Oh, there's a man that is trying to get information out of you, and you need to do it." And I mean, the way he got these people to testify, like, "Oh, I saw Mansfield in Villisca." It was neighbors of the Moore family. You know, like why would you wait 2 years
Yeah.
to say something so like like prolific to the case that could have just broke it wide open from the start. That's
That wouldn't fly today. Fortune tellers and stuff. We don't
oh
operate
it,
like that.
it
I mean,
no, it
you
sounds like some out of
can't
a
just do
parody.
that. It
It sounds
does.
like a
It really does.
parody. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Luckily they got to no one even bought that in 1912. Uh and it really stinks too because I always think of how awkward this town was. Like you have Jones and it just I would be going nuts if I was Frank Jones. I'm like my life is on the line and it's like people are just lying out of their asses about oh
Yeah.
excuse my language if your son's in the room but
Nope. 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 Nope.
no
No. You're
okay
fine. You're
okay
fine.
like there's lying off their butt and
Hmm.
I can only imagine like what do you do in that situation other than wait it out and then on top of that after he finally gets that vindication of oh this case is done like I'm proven innocent. Wilkerson never went away. Never. Like he was even with the Kelly trials. I mean, this dude never gave up. And Jones doesn't win the slander suit. He like and his memoirs, everything. He dies. His career is destroyed. I just always
Hmm.
find it funny. Like this, it could be not even just about Villisca, but yeah, like you know how good every TV show has like those ending episode cliffhangers of like what the hell, what's gonna happen next.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, dude. The basis of Villisca and how this town was so divided, and my monologue didn't really do it great justice because there's so many details I had to leave out. That's why I recommend anyone listening to check out any book by it, specifically Ed Epperly's Fan Incarnate. It's just nuts.
Yep.
And that's finally pushed under the rug. That's pretty much the Wilkerson bit. The main point of this interview is I wanted to talk about George Kelly. This
Right.
is uh, I kind of just wanted to go over what we talked about here, your few insights on the basis, but where this case really gets interesting, all comes back to George Kelly. I had an interesting conversation with you over the phone, and it really makes this like you think it's serial killer, but then there's Kelly, and
Yep.
it's probably what's kept me going back to this case. It's not even just like, oh, I know, because I'm always learning something more. There's a couple things in
Hmm.
this monologue. So I want to go back to 1912. Just start from the top when I first introduced him. He's born in London, England, October 19th, 1878. He immigrates to the United States with his wife, Laura. Very strange relationship, by the way. I mean, this
Yep.
was some Norman Bates like it gave me that vibe. I know different like your wife compared to your mom, but it was
Right.
strange.
Yeah.
Between 1904 and the spring of 1912, Kelly worked at nearly 15 churches. Okay,
Hmm.
and I was as I was writing all this out, I knew a lot of this, but one thing that really struck me is he has the perfect job to be somebody that's doing these religious sacrifices. Like, I mean, he's bouncing around from Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska. Who's to say he didn't go on a, week off
Hmm.
to somewhere secluded and a little bit off the radar, like
Yep.
Monmouth, Illinois, you
Oh,
know?
yep.
Uh, and and I'm not saying that's the case, but it makes it interesting. This wasn't a guy that was just staying in a single place, that
Right.
kind of can add some depth to it. And he leaves the Methodist Church in 1912, in May of 1912, and enrolls Presbyterian. But he ends up in Villisca the weekend of June 8th. And one thing that's not talked about with Kelly in particular, we know about what he was doing before the crime happened. He was, at church. But the night before, he is with Louis Anderson's family. And I have seen interviews of Johnny Hauser, who used to work at Villisca,
Okay.
and he said he spoke to one of the Anderson ancestors that knew of Louis Anderson, or like a daughter of Louis Anderson, something like that at one point. And this story that she says, it doesn't do justice just knowing about it. It's more so like how nuts this dude was. Because
Yeah.
this daughter or whatever, heard it from somebody that was there. Like
Yep.
this dude was off the wall at supper, apparently, with the Anderson family. Pervy with the little girls.
Yep.
That's
They
key.
they they felt uncomfortable, didn't want him there. Yep.
Yeah. And he's pacing like the grandmother is sitting at the top of the stairs because she's worried that he's trying to come up to see if the girls were sleeping. And what does this tell me about Kelly? I think a lot of people downplay, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think a lot of people downplay like, oh, Kelly was just a perv. Like he probably wasn't a threat, but clearly it's not nuts to assume if this grandma spent the night at the top of the stairs, probably not getting much sleep. She had to really perceive this dude as a threat to do something bad. And I always find that interesting. Like the Man from the Train book, they kind of downplay Kelly. I think that's one thing I don't like to make their case of this serial killer more
Yep.
strong.
Yep.
Um, and I want to hear just your thoughts on like what do you think of Kelly's demeanor? Like, do you think it's that far out there that he could have the courage to, if this was even if this was just a one and done crime and it was a
Hmm.
copycat murder,
Yeah.
when you look at crimes and like this your police work,
Hmm.
and I know you don't do murder, but you obviously are in the field.
Yep.
Like what do you see from Kelly's profile? Is it that much of an exaggeration to say he just did it, Like in
Hmm.
terms of having the courage to step inside a house for the first time and
Right. So the axe murders back then, obviously it happened before 1912, and I'm sure just with his demeanor, as far as he was enamored by how these crimes, especially Villisca, he was very into it after it occurred. Part of me thinks that his mentality was, it could be a copycat thing where he was wanting to do it, and then he saw these axe murders, saw them in the papers, and gave him the courage to do it, possibly. But back then, I mean, as it is now, there's a lot of crazy people out there that do a lot of weird stuff. And he's probably one of those guys that, and I've dealt with a lot, that just, they're insane. And he's using this ministry thing as kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing to get close to people, and use that to his advantage. But I mean, personally, if I had a traveling minister, which it was big back then, not such a thing now,
yeah.
but if I had something like that in my house, like I'd be throwing them out. But again, back then, I don't know what the code was to throw somebody out in 1912 if that was really rude or whatever, no matter how you felt. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just people do weird stuff, and even people that are seem completely normal go off and do really odd, horrible things. So him just being the way he was, like say it kind of sells the case for me. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a deviant for sure. I mean, he had
Yes.
issues. He had mental issues. In today's society, he'd be heavily medicated or institutionalized, but back then, probably didn't have that. So,
Exactly.
yep,
Exactly. And that's very true. People that even appear on normal on the surface do awful
yep,
stuff. We see it in
yep,
cases that go unsolved and then are solved through DNA or something. No one had this
yep.
dude on their radar.
Yep, and that's happened in several cases that I've worked over the years. I mean, I've sent people to prison, using DNA stuff like that,
Hmm.
that you would never suspect. Went to church every Sunday. They were a proud person of the community, and next thing you know, they're spending years in prison because then everyone in the community shocked. Like I can't believe that person would do that.
Yeah.
Like I say,
It's
yeah,
nuts. It
yep,
is nuts.
yep,
Uh, but yeah, that night, don't bring the grandma ends up saying, "Don't bring that man here again. He's crazy." The next morning, when he's gone, evening of June 9th, Kelly is sitting in the pews of the Presbyterian Church. Same service as the Moore and Stillinger girls. The next
hmm,
morning after the service, he's out on the number 5 train at 5:19 a.m. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I remember when I was writing this monologue and the stuff that I've always looked past. I can't explain it. Like I knew some of the stuff I was writing, of course, but I never was like I never had a revelation with it. I would have kind of always just go past it in a way. Kelly did a couple things that I I guess before I wrote this monologue, I was kind of on the fence. I thought maybe there was a chance that a serial killer was also in town, and Kelly might have, uh, as crazy as it is, like a God sent mystery that it was supposed to be unsolved, like was in the house later. But the thing that's interesting me with Kelly is, uh, he claimed when he got invested in the case immediately after hearing about it, talking to every single person about these murders. Like I can't even picture talking about something like I can't imagine talking about anything for just nonstop, 24/7 every day.
Reasonable
Um,
person wouldn't.
yeah, exactly. That just goes
Yeah.
into his sanity,
Yep.
his insanity. He he's begging Pastor Ewing to help him arrange a visit to the crime scene when he comes in Villisca the next time. They get one going, and he catches the eye of Detective O'Leary, who was one of the first investigators with the Hayes Detective Agency. O'Leary was smart. I think there was another detective, and he's slipping my mind right now, who wasn't really sold on Kelly, but O'Leary went with it. Thank God he did, because I think this is a huge. I'm not even talking about everything involving he was speaking of the murders before they happened. The thing that stuck to me, and I said this in my very first episode when I talked to Ed, it all comes back to Sarah Moore for me. I don't think she was the target, but how she died, how like the her cuts in her face. Kelly writes back to Tom O'Leary after O'Leary asks him, "Did you see anything that night?" Like, Kelly wanted to be Mr. Detective on this case. He claimed the killer. He said Mrs. Moore reared up in bed before the killer struck her. I've always known that Kelly wrote to O'Leary during the initial weeks of the investigation. Never did I just think though. Wait, he mentioned Sarah Moore rearing up in bed. Why Sarah Moore? In that, but that fits how the cuts in her face. How she kind of had a blow on the top of her head, and then there were specific cuts, like 1 inch cuts,
Yep.
like an accordion, opening her face with an
Yep.
accordion. Like,
Right.
why would you say that? Like I just find it unusual that the rearing up in bed fits the profile of the axe marks. And Kelly's not some smart guy. Like he didn't walk through the house after the crime when the murder, the victims were still in their beds. Like he didn't. And he is saying that Sarah Moore reared up in bed. That was huge to me personally. Everything else kind of just supports that. But I remember I probably took a day break after writing that part, and it kind of sold me with Villisca. Um, and I can't sit here and say I don't question it, but very interesting in my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
Just based on, how everyone was murdered in the house, we talk about F.F. Jones, would his feud with, Josiah Moore, would that escalate to the point where he's going to kill everybody in the house? I don't think so. So again, with Kelly, um, yeah, he was just a definite deviant. Also, he was impotent. So I think part of it was his lust, of viewing the family and stuff, the girls at the church service, and then just jealousy, um, that something he could never attain, he could never have.
I've
And
never
so,
I've never heard, I
and
never
a
heard
lot,
that.
yeah, and a lot of times, a lot of crimes that we see are it's all out of jealousy. It's all out of envy. People are upset. It's an emotional charge thing. He couldn't conceive kids. And look at the Moores. I don't know if he knew that Ina and Lena Stillinger were not part of that family, but he's looking at a guy that's married to a wife. They have a bunch of kids, and they're all happy, and they're going home from a church service.
Dude, I
And
have
that's something he would never be able to attain. And maybe that's something that he always had that thought in the back of his head, and that's something that just lit the spark to do what he did.
I've never heard that perspective, and I do think that makes sense because on top of Sarah Moore being killed the way she was, with how her axe
Mhm.
marks were unique,
Yep.
Josiah Moore was obliterated to a pulp. He was the most
Yep.
damaged, and that's when people would say, "Oh, F.F. Jones did it." That's why Josiah
Mhm.
Moore. But we could say the same about Kelly. That could be the jealousy of Joe Moore. I've
Yeah.
never really
Because
had it.
because what Josiah Moore was, whether I don't know how well they knew each other, I mean, being at the church and stuff, but you look at Josiah Moore
They didn't know each other much. To answer your
right.
question, yeah,
So okay, so you look at Josiah Moore is everything that George Kelly could never be, could
yeah,
never have, and maybe that
yeah.
was part of the frustration with that is he had a thing for he was a window peeper, stuff like that. He wanted that one girl to type in the nude, whatever
Yeah.
for him. So
Yes.
obviously he had some issues and some triggers, And then you look at, if there was something that set him off, he sees this large, beautiful family with all these kids and stuff, and then it just pushed him over the edge.
Yeah.
That's
And
just one of
no,
my
and
my
I
theories
think
about
it's
it. I mean, we'll never
I
know exactly, but
yeah, yeah, no, that's all it's all speculation, but I always love hearing new ideas.
right.
I mean, it's not like a theory. Every theory that I actually take credit to make I could see making sense in like in a rational perspective. It's not like, it just makes sense. So, we got that and he eventually Kelly, let's see, died down. So, he was put on pause for in 1912. It eventually died down with how they knew Kelly was, he brought attention to himself. Dies down in 1912. They just didn't have enough to make a case. I mean, just because a guy's obsessed with a murder, yeah, that's definitely alarming, but is that like, I mean, what are you going to do with that, Like,
Yeah.
what are you going to do with
What evidence?
somebody?
What is that's not really good evidence. Someone
Yeah.
just
And
curious.
I think they knew that. I just think they were pretty much, I would assume that law enforcement was kind of hopeless. Like what are you like? Especially they didn't have the tools that like by the
Yeah.
first end of the second month, I would imagine. Like, dude, what else can you really do? I mean,
Yeah.
without DNA, without surveillance, like there's nothing
Right.
you can really do.
Yeah.
It
So, and a lot of people I've talked about Villisca, they look at things as the capabilities that we have today in law enforcement. Um, that didn't exist back then. And so a lot of people were like, well, why didn't they get, DNA? Why didn't they,
yeah.
seize this, seize that, it just wasn't it didn't things just didn't operate that way back then. Law enforcement wasn't exactly professional back in 1912,
Well,
like
yeah,
it is today.
exactly. And what stinks is people like Hank Horton, people
Mhm.
like kind of shame like he did amazing, I think, for what he was working with at trying to keep people back. I remember there's a quote, I don't know if it was from Ed's book or maybe Roy Marshall's where they go in the front like you block the
Block the
citizens from
front,
the
they
front,
go out the back, they go to the
they go to
back.
the
Yep.
back. Like
Yep.
they were trying and
Mhm.
and I hate people's argument too, and I hear it all the time. Like, oh, this would have been solved. Like, even if no one got in the house, this murder wasn't going to be solved. They didn't have, in my opinion, I don't know what the difference would have been because back
Right.
then fingerprints you had to be in a jail system, right? Correct?
Right.
Like they didn't
So
just fingerprint everyone into a database.
Right. So back in fingerprints weren't really a big thing until I just made a note of this until like 1880. Henry Faulds came up with that whole concept of, well, fingerprint, create a database, stuff like that. Today we call it the AFIS system, where if you've ever been fingerprinted in your life, there's a huge system nationwide that if if we pick up a fingerprint off a crime, it'll find you. And so, but back then, it was kind of like say fingerprinting was in its infancy back in
Right.
1912. So really, didn't, and there was no such thing as DNA back then. That's been just a recent thing in the last 20 years. They're solving cases now that happened 30, 40 years ago with DNA because we've got that technology and we were able to tie that together. So even like the bloody shirt that you know George Kelly turned in. Could they have gotten DNA off of that because of the blood? No, they wouldn't have. They didn't have that capability back then. But just to your point, it would be very hard to solve it just as it was, even with fingerprints, because there was no national database that would have found like, oh, that's George Kelly's fingerprint.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Hmm.
so that's something that's like, yeah, it wouldn't have mattered, guys. I mean, this was a case and that's what stinks. I mean, whoever did this, I hate to give them like messed up to give them credit, but like they were good at the killing, but they obviously were not. But you
Hmm.
didn't necessarily have to be that careful after. Uh,
No, and like I said, what we look at today is, it's very hard to get away with a crime today.
yeah,
Everyone's got a cell phone. Everyone's got security cameras. There's always somebody watching, capturing something. Um, and so back then, they didn't have to worry about that. Even up until like the late 70s, there was still no,
which could be interesting. Why that was the kind of the final age of serial killing,
yeah,
with
because
Bundy and
it was yeah, like say Richard Kuklinski, he was a mafia hitman back in the late 70s, early 80s. But as technology goes on and progresses, it's so hard to get away with something like that. So back in 1912, oh my gosh, I mean, it's like I mean, no one had a Ring doorbell camera that could say, "Hey, we saw this guy walking past our
I
house
mean
at 12:30 at night."
that's what's crazy, man. Especially with I talked to you on the phone about this. There was
Mhm.
the you never heard about. I highly advise you to look it up.
Okay.
The Delphi murders with the Abby Williams and Liberty German. They were on this
Okay.
bridge in 2017, and this case always struck me because they were my
Hmm.
age when this happened.
Okay.
They were in eighth grade. I was in eighth, like we were in the same age,
Mhm.
and they were on this bridge. They get this picture that they get a the Liberty
Oh,
one
that guy that told him to get down in
get
like the
go
ditch
down the
or
hill, down the
down the
hill.
hill and then
They
shot
got
him.
this guy on
Hmm.
video,
Yep.
and no, Richard Allen. This dude was on no one's radar. He was hiding in plain sight, like everyone
Yep.
kind of knew.
Yep.
Um, but like, it's almost like the reason I'm bringing that up. It's almost like it comes down to luck nowadays with getting away with crimes, in my opinion.
It does.
Because eventually, I give it even a couple of years, they usually find the guy. Usually,
Yep.
something happens,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's the thing with Villisca. Yes, Villisca wouldn't be a mystery if it happened even 10 years ago. Like it just wouldn't
Right.
be. You know,
Yeah.
this would have been solved pretty
Well,
quickly, I think, obviously.
absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
leaving the murder weapon at the scene. So, yeah, after the so anyway, after the long battles with Jones and Wilkerson and the failed slander suit, juries changing direction. I'm gonna be real with you. This may be embarrassing considering I'm 22. I didn't even know the jury could do that. I wasn't aware of that. So like they can just like, yeah, we want another suspect. Like that. I was a little confused when I was t writing this.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Like,
like the jury, if I mean it could be a hung jury, they don't all agree that they believe it could be somebody else, or they just don't believe that the person that's being accused is the right person.
okay.
Um, so
Yeah, which
yeah.
I get that part. I just didn't know like I thought once that was it, that was it. They couldn't just like continue on. But
Mhm.
obviously they look at Kelly then.
Yep.
Like we're at least gonna have somebody that is they know the basic details of the story.
Mhm.
Obviously stuff was not known about, the shirt, the window peeping, that type of stuff was revealed to them by Horace Habner, who was a big push for Kelly
Mhm.
being the guy. He knew from it seems like from the context and the stuff I've read, it seemed like Horace Abner knew day one. The police say they can't find anything of value to Kelly by the end of 1912. He goes under the radar.
Mhm.
1914 rolls around and he is putting advertisements in the newspaper for a secretary to type in the nude. Sus, very suspect.
Yep.
Uh, Obviously, thank goodness that this and I don't know if this person, I used to think this was an underage girl, but she actually wasn't. And from my understanding, I found her on Ancestry. I think she was actually 18. I could be entirely wrong though. It might not have been the
Mhm.
right, but uh,
Right.
that happens. But there's one thing I did not say in my monologue. This story's creepy to me. So Kelly, on top of the insane asylum, which we're going to get to in a minute, after the actually, I'll just say so in the insane asylum, Kelly then gets sent to an insane asylum after he's caught typing to this woman. They find he's batshit crazy.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's the way you can describe it.
Yep.
He's sending letters to the authorities in Villisca,
Hmm.
going back and forth. And Ed Epperly dropped the bomb on me when I was emailing him,
Hmm.
and he was giving me feedback. I do not think what he told me is even in his book. It might be. I just don't remember. I got to reread it.
Yeah, I'd have to as well.
But Kelly, which is just another chain of circumstantial evidence. The bacon is the most bizarre piece of evidence in Villisca.
Yep.
Even the aid theory of using that for his pleasure,
Hmm.
it's very out there.
Yep.
Kelly, when he was in this insane asylum, was stealing meat from this asylum's kitchen and hiding it in areas around his room. I mean, it makes no sense. I don't understand what bro was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
But like, come on, all that tells me though that was the moment I knew like, yeah, Kelly was either the killer. He was in the house though. Like there's no other logical sense of it because every other axe murder, if it was a serial killer, there was nothing like that. Nothing. There was nothing like that. Not even in the realm of anything like that in the crime scene. So that was like my final bit. Like people that testified that he was speaking of these murders before they happened, they had their dates right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who's doing that? And so that's one thing, but I don't know if you know about after this, when he gets out of this insane asylum, and he might have been in Nebraska. I think he was preaching in Nebraska at the time. After he gets out of this asylum, um, he's in a kitchen late at night of a local in town, and it's about, I don't know, 12:30 at night, something like that. He's sitting at their kitchen table, and I think it was a elderly woman that was living alone. I don't know if you've heard this story.
I don't think I have.
And he's sitting at this kitchen table, and this elderly woman like, just heard somebody come in her house. She comes down, pitch black house. Kelly's just sitting there at the kitchen table. Mind you, it's like
Oh
midnight.
wow,
And he's
wow.
like, we shouldn't. And he starts going like a monologue type speech, just the speech of just like the Villisca murders and why we shouldn't punish the Villisca killer for being sick.
Mm,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, you're in.
Yeah.
And probably the stuff I'm saying is further solidifying but who's,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
who is saying that, man? Like, that is like,
Right.
I mean, this is a dude that's killed six kids, and I mean, the most evil act imaginable. And we're talking
Yeah.
about having pity on the murderer,
Right. Right.
right?
I just don't understand. Like, say, just, I mean, all the facts show and prove that he was insane. He was crazy. How could a church, regardless of denomination, employ this man basically? Like, how could they sell their religion with this guy? I mean, obviously, I mean, if that happened today, this guy would be locked up. Like, he'd be in like a group home or something. Like, people just can't just walk into people's houses and act like this and do things like that.
That's
Uh,
that's what's crazy to me, dude. This dude was in Nebraska, especially because I
yeah.
mean, I mean, he was the moment that the nude typing happened, you're done.
Mhm.
Like, you're
Yeah.
done. I mean,
Yep.
and nowadays, I think that's when things are different. He
Mhm.
he he would be done.
Yeah.
We hear it all the time, and I'm a huge Christian. Uh, like
Awesome.
people like to mix like and I cannot stand it. There's gonna be bad apples in every area you work in.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
but the reason I think the bad apples of people that work in ministry and stuff, I think it's highlighted more so than other areas because
Mhm.
they're serving for Jesus, for God.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like that, I'm just saying that in regards to like this dude would be blasted immediately if
Oh,
this was a
yeah.
modern day. And I
Yeah.
think that was kind of a new, I don't know, pedophilia, especially, with how he
Mhm.
was and
Mhm.
pervertedness. That was more of a, I think it's obviously like more shamed upon today, like it should be, like you need to be locked up.
Yeah.
Uh, Not saying that it was legal. I'm just saying like people weren't going out of their way to catch guys like this and to,
Right. Yep.
put them behind bars.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, that was always a creepy story to me. So, and that kind of answered my question. Well, I mean, he's brazen enough to just go into an elderly woman's house. I mean, this dude was just walking into houses. So it's
Yeah.
like
Yep.
he's setting fires in Nebraska. There's a couple cases, and I just like linking this to how this could fit the other murders. This could be
Mhm.
a one and done crime very well. I do have a hard time believing that. That's what's I am very sold. That's one thing I'm a man from China. I am very sold that at least the five Midwestern murders, which
Right.
we all get to the viewers, they are so similar. Um, Maybe we could argue Paola, Kansas. I find that one to be a little bit different, which was
Mhm.
the one that happened 4 days before Villisca. But
Mhm.
it's even if this was a one and done crime, it's one of those things where I believe that I almost sometimes think Kelly could have been this guy. I have a hard time believing that Kelly was a one and done murderer when it's just so similar.
Yeah.
Sunday night, I remember there's a book I read recently on Villisca, and I have six books here just on the Villisca case on my bookshelf.
Right.
And
Same here.
yeah, one of them's called On the Road to Villisca. And this dude
Okay.
was, I mean, I don't know, I forget who wrote it, but it was like a 2010 book. I mean,
Mhm.
and one thing he heavily emphasized on not Kelly, but like the religious sacrifice. Somebody that was, and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, these murders were occurring Sunday nights. I think this person, whoever, if it was a singular person, I do think this was a person that was thinking like Old Testament type, like demented type stuff where they didn't understand either the context of
Hmm.
it, or they like really thought that I mean, they were insane and thought they were like doing God's will,
Right.
hearing voices and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And
Hmm.
that fits Kelly's bill.
Yep.
It's like the more I go into it, the more I'm like, I hope one day we find a record placing Kelly somewhere in
Right.
this murder. In the
And so I look at it as, what kind of a person would take an axe and kill kids, I mean, anybody, regardless, but especially little kids, stuff like that. It would take someone that's completely insane. And who was in Villisca that night that was completely insane, that had a track record of being crazy? George Kelly.
Exactly. And I actually quoted it in the venue. Yeah, it's funny when I talked to you on the phone, you quoted the same quote. It's like my favorite summary. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite quotes from Ed Epperly's book. It's I forget how it goes exactly, but and I say it in my monologue. It can be easy to assume that there were two people in Villisca that night, one being
Right.
crazy enough to do the killings,
Right.
and another being the preacher Kelly, being in the
Right.
same place at the same night. Easier to
What are
assume it was Reverend Kelly.
what are
Eh,
the odds you'd have those two
Yeah,
people in one small town in little town Iowa
yeah, and
where
I mean that's a point, and not impossible. I mean, not my
right.
original theory kind of was like just because of the other murders, but if we're looking at this,
Mhm.
even if I just look at it, the more I've been learning about Kelly, I do think it's easy. That's the easiest assumption. I don't,
Yeah.
and that's what stinks is we'll never know. When it's not like there's going to be, there was, and that will be one of the final things I say. I will talk about a letter that, and I told you kind of about this. But I'll get to that in a little bit. That was discovered by the locals in Villisca down the line. Um, but so he goes on. The jury hears this evidence, and the first element I called it the periodic table of Kelly mints. It's corny. That was my sick title for it. Element
Yep.
one was the shirt. Happens a week after the Villisca murders. And this is where I'm like, Kelly, if this was Kelly's got to be the biggest moron of all time. Like it's a white shirt, bro. Like what like just throw it
Throw it
away.
away. Right. Burn it.
And
Something.
that's one of the things that makes me like I understand he wasn't bright, but like that's one of the things that kind of it supports his case to me, but it also doesn't. Because it makes no sense that he'd do that.
Right.
And there's the obviously the defense team for Kelly was arguing, oh, he cut it, it's blood from when he was shaving, like cuts and blood. But
Yep.
from what I understand, from what Ed Epperly and I have talked about, and it was pretty big, lot of blood.
Right.
And I do find it funny that he was so anonymous with how he dropped it into the mail slot, how he was very hesitant of letting anyone know where he
Right.
and, and how he tried to clean it on his own. This probably was
Yeah.
not a guy that tried to clean his own clothes. Um, that was one. We have the voyeurism aspect of him, peeking through windows, uh, and stuff. And then we have the unhinged deviancy, which we talk about the arson things. There's these two fires that Kelly confessed to, and we can assume that he started them.
Yep.
And I do find it interesting. This is where I relay it back to, I believe it was Colorado Springs. It was the double event when two houses were wiped out. And the man from the train goes even further back from this, the original five, everyone think it's like Jack the Ripper. There's like a canon five, they call it,
Mhm.
like of the
Right.
five murders of of one man. But in the murders that the man from the train goes even further back, trying to link to the original, to the
Yeah.
canonical five of the Villisca of the Midwest axe murders, there were a lot of elements of always burning crime scenes and stuff. That would not support Kelly. Kelly moved here in 1904. There were crimes that were happening in that
Yep.
book that were before then. Uh, but there was 1908, 1909, or 1907. There were a couple crimes where the killer would try to light the house on fire. Even if it's not Kelly, I always find it interesting. There were elements that aligned with whoever, if it was a serial killer, that aligned with Kelly. I don't think this guy was as mentally stable, living like a double life, like we see modern serial killers live it, like
Right.
we've seen killers like Ted
Yeah.
Bundy or, oh my God, I could never imagine. I have a hard time believing it was that type of person, whoever
Right.
it
Not a
could have
not
been.
not a John Wayne Gacy kind of guy.
Yeah,
No.
I just don't,
No.
I don't see it. I
Yeah.
think it's
I don't either.
too, I think, in that I think it all comes down to the amount of people he take out. Like this wasn't like a guy picking one person off at a time. This was a guy that was just going in to homes. That has got to be you got to be so insane that you have that level of just careless, brazen
Yeah.
characteristics.
Yeah.
And that's my theory on why I think whoever it was somebody that was very much like Kelly. If it wasn't Kelly
Yeah.
who did this, why that's why Andy Sawyer was so interesting to me because he kind of had that bit
Right.
to him, but
Yeah.
he was debunked.
But a lot of times, what like I say, and people involved in crimes and stuff, what they're motivated by is usually like sexual deviancy, stuff like that. The odds, I look at it too, of some guy just coming into town and having like laid eyes on, the family at the church and stuff like that. He had to have come across them. Whoever did it actually knew them, knew where they went. It wasn't that he picked a house at random. Um, he's looking
Oh,
for
really?
a body count. What if this person just was like, I'm gonna kill somebody. Let's say there was just one person, like it was a little old lady that lived in that house. He's just gonna kill one person with an axe. I believe that whoever did it was connected to the Moors that saw them, observed them, obsessed about it. And of course, he gives a confession and says, "Yeah, I was told by God to slay utterly and all this stuff. I heard these voices." Even if he's crazy, I mean, they were like, "Oh, he's just nuts." Even at today's standards, he might be nuts, but he gave a confession. They said, "Well, they beat it out of him." I mean, who makes that up? He knows what he's going to face if he's convicted. He
I
can face
agree
the
with
death
that
penalty. Why would he?
100%.
Why would he confess to resigning himself to death? He
Well,
wouldn't.
and I do think it can be tough because Villisca, who would make that up that's already been connected? I do think there's a difference
Mhm.
between false confessions.
Right.
1931, a man named Leroy Robinson confessed to the crime, but I mean, this is a dude, and he kind of went. I guess he must have heard of like the drama. Somebody paid me $500 in Kansas City to wipe out the family by a powerful man, and like this was a dude that was
Right.
just trying to make. I never understood that with the human mind. Why are you making false confessions? What is the actual point? Are you
Right.
just trying to look more like a piece of crap? Like I don't.
Right.
I mean, perhaps I don't know, but
Yeah.
with Kelly, yeah, you're linked to it, and I don't care what it takes. If I was already being looked at and I didn't do it, like the amount that I was being looked at and being held for, dang right, I wouldn't. Not no beating would take me to confess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so I look at too with Kelly is that he had set fires before in other places, and you look at that, it's kind of like he's got a repressed rage about him. People that do that, they seem kind of calm on the outside, but inwardly they've got a lot of rage, a lot of anger, and they do stuff like that. They set fires. Um, but in this case, the way he bludgeoned everybody as bad as he did, especially Josiah and Sarah, to me, I mean, this is kind of my belief on it. He's the guy who did it. He was jealous. He was crazy, and when he saw that whole family, it just tripped his trigger, and he went in and did it. And um, yeah, I mean, that's my theory is that he was jealous that he couldn't have what they had. And that's
yeah,
why it was so. And again, would we be talking about the Villisca axe murders if it was done with a firearm? Say he went in and shot everybody. Would we be talking about it? Maybe, but probably not because it's the way the case or the crime happened. It was that brutal. There was a lot of anger behind that. Usually people that shoot somebody, and there's a lot of feelings involved. I'm mad at you, I'm going to shoot you. But taking a knife to somebody or an axe, that's a very personal
yes,
attack.
I agree.
It escalates the I don't know how you'd say it, but it just escalates everything. It's like, man, like this person was really upset. And I look at George Kelly as, impotent, no kids, not much going for him. He's just traveling around here to here to here. And um, that's kind of my theory on it is he was just a jealous pervert and couldn't help himself.
Yeah,
I
it's
kind of went off
always
on a tangent there. I'm sorry, but that's
no.
just, yeah.
I actually love. I maybe I should have told you before, and I love that. I think you are my guest. I talked for 54 minutes, I believe, before this
Right.
interview happened.
Okay.
Dude,
Yep. Nope.
I should have said that from the get-go. That's one thing I loved about Ed. Man, I had that interview with Ed, and
Yeah.
every time I talk to Ed, bro, he
Yeah.
he's like doesn't hold back.
Yep.
There's been I've heard so many interesting stories. He got into there was one time I had to edit a part out, and I wanted to keep it so bad because it was so damn interesting, and
Hmm.
it was we were talking about the attic and how I like we were like, oh, they claimed they found like a newspaper reporter phony like wrote some made up some stuff that they found cigarette butts in the attic, and he's like, no, well, he started going on a tangent about, and I loved it. It was like actually so interesting about how
Yeah.
cigarettes.
He brought a lot of stuff to light when I met with him in Decorah. We went to Impact Coffee up there. I met him up in Decorah, and he talked about I brought that up, and he said cigarettes really weren't that prevalent back then. It's mostly like pipe
Yeah,
tobacco
I
stuff like
didn't
that. I
know
mean,
that.
like if you had cigarettes, like you were right uptown, man. Like you had some money. Like it cost money to buy actual cigarettes. And I looked at that theory too. He talked about I said the axe mark in the wall. I said you go there
I
today. I said there's a mark, and I said that's because he used the blunt end, so he hit the ceiling with the blade of the axe, came down and hit him. I said that mark is still there. I've got a picture of it, and he goes, that's not real.
Yeah, it isn't, and
And I said, really? I said, I'm really upset because they play it off. The people that open it up and run it, they
it's
play it off as
awful,
like
dude.
that's the actual mark in the wall that he left in 1912. And I was like, and I was enamored by it. I mean, I looked at it, I was like, man, I got to get a
No,
picture of it. This is
it's
like it's
almost
crazy.
surreal. It's like you're like it's like a gateway to the past in a way. It's not
Yeah,
even just a picture. It's like, oh,
yeah,
this was physically it. But
yeah.
he's right. And I remember the first one of the first times I talked to him. I think what they did, and I think Darwin Lin, who made that, who wrote like started that house. I think he had good intentions, but I think there
Yeah,
was some phony crap going on because,
yeah,
and I'm thankful that it's kept the story alive.
yeah.
But if it wasn't for Ed, nothing online would be telling you this stuff because a few interesting things here is there was a and Adam might know something and he just didn't tell me. I don't know. But when I brought that axe mark up, I'm like, is that true? That can't be true. And I go through every detective, like I go through every single newspaper article, like I could find not a single, and that would have been sensational about how there was just huge axe, like not nothing, like there was nothing available of an axe mark. And what's crazy is there's footage of the news, there's a news video on the internet. It's like an archive from that time when they from the 1990s. They recently posted it, and I think it got taken down. There's another one that's up from like a 1998, but like from 1994 or something when they bought the house. It was available for like a month to watch, and I wish I screen recorded it. They're in that room, Joe and Sarah's room,
Mhm.
and I know they say, oh, it was like the tour guide's always hidden behind wallpaper. There's
Mhm.
nothing there, but there's still like there's nothing on that wall.
Yeah.
And there's been people that have brought in luminol
Hmm.
to see blood. Which blood? I mean, that's not that insane. I mean, luminol can
Right.
blood can like residue can be,
Right.
but Ed maybe presented a theory, and I thought it was ridiculous as you were talking about this that like maybe it's like chicken blood they used or something. Like when they because some of the places where the blood is apparently from what Ed and I take everything Ed says is like gospel.
I do
Like
too.
from
Yeah.
for the Villisca case, I
He
don't
talked to
question.
people. He talked to people that are actually there back in like the 50s, 60s, said they were still alive. He actually talked to
Yeah,
first-hand
I
witnesses that were
have
in the house. So he is the epicenter of like, if Ed says that's what happened or that was what was reported, you better believe it.
yeah, like I remember, and that's what I always,
Mhm.
which he's not there anymore. The people that apparently the Villisca house got bought, the people that run it are just it's
They're trying to make money. It's a
it's
sensational thing, and it's turned more into not.
that's where it's getting disrespectful though, and it pisses me off.
Yeah,
Like,
they're trying, and I understand like they do it for historical purposes. Yeah, you pay a little money, like it's a small fee to get in. It's not much, but they do have a lot of like souvenirs, stuff like that. I'm kind of like, well, you're trying to make money off of this tragedy, which I don't like. Movies are the same way. The Titanic, all those things, tragic things. Saving Private Ryan, D-Day. I mean, they're making money off of tragedy, but um, but ultimately it's turned into more of a paranormal thing where they're like putting on these stuff like ghost hunters and they're trying to draw people in to do all this ghost hunting and all that
Well, and
stuff.
I always laugh too because I
Uh,
mean, whatever I'm a believer in the paranormal, but whatever's in that house is not has nothing to do with like if there is some, it has nothing to do with anything that like anybody that was in that house or
no,
involved in it. And I laugh. It's like, dude, it's not worth almost the. I've always wanted to go there to spend the night, but I'm weird. I wouldn't even want to like. I would just want to sleep there. I would want the ambience of that house.
and
It has nothing to do with
yeah,
in one day, maybe one day, but that's way down
yes.
the line when I'm financially
I
stable.
just when like say I've been there twice, and whether it's in your head or not, I mean obviously you go there knowing what happened there, so you've kind of got it in your head a little bit. Some people say your mind was playing with yourself, but it's very the air is very heavy there,
That's
and
what
and
everyone says. Yeah.
it's like say I got physically ill the second time I went back. I went back with the intent to figure out. The first time I just went because I was curious. Didn't really have a problem. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of spooky. But when I went back the second time and basically tried to went in it with a detective mind, saying, I'm going to try and figure out who did this. I'm going to look at everything, look at the house, location, this and that. I was physically ill. I had to go outside, and I
That's
didn't.
what
I
people
didn't. I
say.
didn't. I didn't feel well for a couple days. Um, there's people in there with like their like EMF or GFI readers or whatever, like they could pick up paranormal stuff.
Mhm.
And I was talking to the friend I went with, and I said, like there's that mark. I'm like, he had to have been about, assuming the mark was real on the wall, which I did at the
Yeah.
time. I said he had to have been. He could have been any height. I'm like, you could swing that axe, you could choke up on the handle, you could have it way down here. I said, it doesn't really matter. I said, eventually we'll figure out who did it. And that thing started going off when I said that, and I don't know if that was George Kelly or whoever the murderer was. We went down a rabbit hole.
Well,
We probably
I did tell Ed about this, and that's what's funny with Ed is I have interviews, and this comes back to George Kelly for the viewers.
Mhm.
Did my mic just pick that up? Oh, it just bolted thunder. That was loud.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but no, it goes back. So there was Ed is like interviewed on has been interviewed for TV shows, and he just doesn't
Yes.
remember. He doesn't.
Right.
It's
I've,
just
I've I've watched them on YouTube. Yeah.
it's funny. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like I have to like remind him, no, Ed, it was the one where you're in the light. And he's like trying to think. And then he
Yeah.
finally remembered this one. It was the Dead Files.
Mm,
And this is a show I actually think's pretty legit. I do think this and Ed's experience when he was interviewed. It's Steve DeShavi and Amy Allen. It's kind of an interesting concept. I don't know why it's not more popular. I
mhm.
think it's like the best. I don't think Amy Allen's still there. It's a new medium, but I think it's like one of the most interesting shows, even if you're not in the
Mhm.
paranormal.
Right.
And Amy Allen walks through the house at night, and Steve DeShavi's a retired homicide detective, and he
Mhm.
goes learning about the history of these calls they get of this house. Usually just like family homes that no one, they just move in, there's stuff going on. But they did Villisca one day,
Okay.
and they always have a sketch at the end of the episode. And uh, one of the sketches that they did two for Villisca, but one of them was the person that liked, in Amy Allen's words, she saw in the barn that was hiding, and he was a short man,
Mhm.
and he apparently liked messing with the children after they were dead.
Mhm.
They had a sketch done of this person. She got a quick glimpse of him, as she says. I would think it's hogwash. Like, oh yeah, this is BS because you're just picking the suspect that was known. It was the way that this person was drawn that she described to see him as. The sketch it was Kelly, but he was wearing like a ball cap, like a
Mhm.
black cap,
Yeah.
and like a normal like weird clothes, just like you pick clothes you wouldn't pick.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that align, and like she's helped solve cases in the past with these shows. I believe she's truly
Okay.
legit.
Right.
But I remember I told Ed that too, and he was like, but he was very like had a lot of respect for the Dead Files when Steve interviewed him, and I thought like that's why I felt it was worth mentioning about Kelly that she
Yeah.
claimed she saw Kelly involved in there. But one of the final pieces here, I know we're near an end game, and I appreciate your time so much.
No, I'm
Uh,
loving it.
oh my gosh, okay, 10 minutes. My gosh, this is why I had the paid version. I didn't use it enough though. It's so
Right.
annoying. Um, So yeah, Kelly makes his confession. He's in the jail, he confesses. But right before that, I do think it's very key to note. So the build up to trial after Kelly is booked to jail before before he confesses, everything has been presented to the jury why he should be the guy. They get him, they put him in a Harrison County police station. Is I think he was being held in Harrison County jail.
Okay.
But Horace Habner starts to get to know Kelly, and Kelly falls to foolishness. He gets some exercise, Habner says, and he's swinging and tells Kelly you can swing at the pile of wood behind while they're in the backyard of the jail, and he's swinging the axe left-handed.
Hmm.
Just another blow to, I mean, everything is
Yeah.
just adds up. It's just
Yes.
adding
Yep.
up.
Yep.
Um, and I guess when you're typing this stuff out, you know about everything, but when you're typing it out, you have more impact on the buildup. I don't
Yeah.
know. You think about every sentence you're typing more than just
Hmm.
seeing all the buildup in front of you.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and then finally, this man makes this confession, and I almost laugh at this because in Kelly's confession, he's quoting one of the darker chapters of the Old Testament. I've read through it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people that are not believers and stuff. They don't the context of the Old Testament is very you got to actually take time to understand it.
Hmm.
But he wants to give an first of all, this is how you know this man was the strangest preacher. Like, why slay utterly? How is that a sermon that you want to give? Like, what?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this was a nut job.
Yep.
Ezekiel 9:6, that's where it comes from, and claims he walked down the street and he saw a shadow cast alongside of them or home. What I find funny about this is, and I always do like when Johnny Hauser used to say, because he is right. There's been people that are like, maybe there was always a paranormal, there was a presence there. Maybe it was native land. No one was talking about shadow people back then. That wasn't. I mean, I'm just saying. I don't think that is it, but like, it is
Yeah.
very strange to me. I'm
Yep.
not sitting here saying a shadow gave him the axe, but I'm not. I'm not. No matter how insane he was, that was an unorthodox. That
Mhm.
wasn't a thing. That wasn't something that was known. Oh, shadow person.
Right.
Found that interesting. I'm just,
Hmm.
but he hears a voice. Go on, do as I say, slay utterly. Yes, Lord, I will. One of the reason I think so Kelly had one confession, then he had another that was more bogus. I think they made him do a second one because he says in his first that he killed the children first upstairs and then the parents. Which, regardless, I don't think it takes away. I think it doesn't really matter. I just think once this dude gave a confession that was the end.
Yeah.
Um
I mean,
I don't really.
you give a confession today and you confess to a crime, that's it. I mean, regardless if you're crazy or not, you confess to it, you know, you admitted that, yeah, I did this. And
Yeah.
so that would be the end of the case. It would be like, okay, like
Wait, so
confess to it.
that would really be the end of the day, like even if they.
Well, you'd have to have plenty of evidence too. I mean, you'd
Yeah.
have to have enough to, have probable cause, indict them.
But like right now, like let's say in the context of Villisca, do you
Hmm.
think that would have been enough? Like, do you think he would have been convicted if you put it in the modern standards of the day? If that makes sense.
If he gave a confession and said, I did it, and this is what happened," yeah, very much
Yeah.
so. Yep,
Well, I
it's
always
like
find it
they
funny.
admitted to it.
That's where I think Wilkerson derailed the case because I do think he would have been convicted had it
Yeah,
not.
like I say, and again, you have to have probable cause, plenty of evidence to at least get a charge of murder on somebody. But if you've got them in custody, you've got enough probable cause between the shirt. He was in town. He said he walked by the house and saw a shadow that talked him to come over there or whatever. There's enough probable cause there to indict him on that charge. And then if he's in jail and he gives a confession, granted he's not beat up or anything like that, coerced into something, and he gives a confession, the case is over. I mean, he just confessed to it, guilty.
I've been doing that before you joined, so you heard the robot this time.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. um, but yeah, the confession is given. Kelly is on trial. And we hear a couple more things, most notably the both testimonies to and what's funny is these testimonies were not confirmed. I mean, it could not be confirmed, but uh JP Rea, I mean HP Rea, my bad, was a ticketing agent, supported two of the claims that Kelly was speaking of these murders. Um, what I find interesting though, Lance, is I don't understand how Kelly, let's say he's talking about these murders, he's the killer. How was he not drenched in blood? Okay, like if he's on the
Yep.
train,
Yes.
that confuses the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Um, because Mr. and Mrs. William Simons, weekend of June 1912, they testify they were in Sydney, Iowa. They left Sydney to return home on a Monday morning.
Hmm.
Uh, they reached the main line at Red Oak and then got off and stopped and made connections with the number five train. And that's when the little minister, Kelly, he steps on the number five train with them and he's seated across the aisle, one seat behind the elderly couple. Uh, and you know what? If I had a time machine, this sounds like weird. Um, I wish I could like hear Kelly's voice and just, I picture him, kind of like what's the actor that, there's a certain actor, I think he was in Benchwarmers or something. Or he's in a lot of Adam Sandler movies, and he's a little guy, very little guy. I'm not even asking for the name. I wish I could like there was video. Like that's what makes this case so weird is you don't have like anything to go by on like the mannerisms of these people other than from test.
Hmm.
That's why I find Ed's, being able to talk to Cooper and stuff like these weren't just black and white photographs. I mean, these are just normal people. I kind of sometimes disassociate from that, even though it's obvious.
Hmm.
Uh, but he comes in and they both state that he appeared to be very excited, um, absolutely wild, and talked in a loud voice, talking about the murders. He wanted to be put on the case to work on it as a detective. One of the questions I have for you is one of the things was they could not confirm that the couple would not confirm it was June 10th. They were pretty confident.
Hmm.
HP Rea was a ticket agent. He supported them being able to he supported that there were 12 tickets that were sold for the northbound local that morning.
Hmm.
Two of them could have been the Simonses tickets out of the four that were sold to Carson, Iowa. Do you think this was like, is that like prevalent in cases today where, like, not, I speak more on like non-comp, like you're pretty sure and there's evidence supporting it. Like, does that hurt the case of testimony when it's not, it can't be 1,000, like 100% confirmed, even if it's like 99 of certainty?
Things like that, with the train ticket stubs, this and that. I mean, the advantage we have now is that everything's more documented, time and date stamped. They could have really, back then they didn't really keep a really good record of like it could have been their ticket, it could have not been their ticket. But in today, you buy tickets to go to a concert, and I thought you get email confirmations, time and date stamps when it was bought, who bought it. All those things that this happened today would be looked at, investigated, and grabbed as really crucial evidence to say, hey, these people claim this is what this guy was talking about, and we can confirm absolutely 100% they were on that train, and they said they spoke with this guy, and this is what he told them. So that, I mean, um, that wouldn't hurt the case at all. It would just help everything. The more evidence you can have, the better. And if he's making a statement about these murders before people were even discovered, before the victims were discovered, that's crucial
Yeah,
because there's no other person that would know
absolutely.
that. So
Yeah.
that would definitely make him look like the killer because no one else knows about this. And again, getting knowing for a fact that they were on that train at this time of day, they were the ones that bought the ticket back then. They didn't keep good enough track of that. Today's completely different. Again, the advances in technology, the
Right.
documentation, that would have really been a crucial piece of evidence there to say, yeah, he was talking about this, and these people came forward and said, we were on that train. Can we prove they're on that train? Absolutely. We have their receipt. We have their confirmation they were on that train at that time. That'd have been awesome to have. That's a great piece of
Yeah,
evidence to have.
absolutely. And I mean, and that's what it wasn't even just one. Then we have he gets off the train. This dude, I mean, he was an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
If he's the killer, he was
Mm-hmm.
asking, "Yo, catch me!" Like it
Yeah.
was another level of hiding in plain sight. The dude was in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
Like the more I've looked into it, I'm not saying there wasn't a serial killer on the rails, but it
Mm-hmm.
has been kind of this has kind of been this whole project. That's why I'm thankful I've done this. Ed pitched it to
Mm-hmm.
me. I mean, this whole project has given me kind of a fresh look. I
Hmm.
used to be so deep in the conspiracy of the serial killer.
Hmm.
And that's still the basis of this podcast, but
Yeah.
um, it definitely is. It makes Villisca. I'm a little bit more, at least. I know half of the story, at least. I know
Hmm.
Kelly was there. I used to
Yeah.
be like, maybe he's just not. Maybe there's just no way. And I have that, that piece of the puzzle with Kelly. But the final piece of evidence was also for the final testimony in the first trial. The second trial, it was just pretty much a recap of the first.
Yeah.
Um, was a man named Barnett claims that Kelly steps off the train. Barnett was the worker of managing a hardware store
Hmm.
by the train depot down the street and in Macedonia. Kelly just comes up to Barnett and just starts yapping about the murders. He said he was standing on the upstairs porch at the Presbyterian manse when he heard the thud of an axe.
Hmm.
Like what are you even talking about, dude? Like he kept talking about always even in the letters to O'Leary, he talked about hearing the thud of this axe.
Would you
Well,
really hear? Would you even hear it?
the only way you would hear it, technically, you could maybe code it as, oh, I heard it from far away. The only way you're hearing a thud of an axe or even focusing on just saying I heard it is if you did it. That's another thing that's kind of like,
Yeah. But I
um,
have a hard time believing that, you look at it now, just say this happened today and you're walking past a house and someone's upstairs in
no,
this
you can't
house
hear
and
crap.
and they hit someone in the head with an axe. Are you going to hear that? No,
No,
no.
exactly. And
It's a possibility, but highly unlikely. And then why would you think it was the thud of an axe? What is the sound of a thud of an axe sound like? How does someone know that? Again, to your point, you were the one that did it.
yeah, and that kind of just came up to me on the spot when I was just saying that. I mean, very strange, even like if you're talking about the murders beforehand, you're probably like you would think you'd be just talking like you were to the Simonses about it, like how there was a murder. No, but he's talking about how he hears a thud of an axe. And this was right between 7:15 and 8 a.m. The bodies on June 9th, I mean on June 10th,
Yeah.
1912. The
Yep.
bodies were not discovered until 8:30.
Mm.
Barnett had a couple of mix-ups and that kind of led people. But the Simonses then came in. Barnett came first.
Mhm.
Simonses then came in and supported it. Like, yo, he was talking about it to us too.
Yep.
But that's what happens. Kelly ends up. There was one juror that was convinced Kelly did it. Like
Mhm.
he would not fold. I think this dude, whoever this was, he has a name. It's talked about in multiple books about it. Forget his
Mhm.
name at the top of my head. I imagine like this is where it takes a special kind of just don't care. I believe what I believe. He was like
Mhm.
11 of the other people that were like not guilty because they were so twisted on the Jones theory.
Yep.
11 of them were trying, they held out like all night trying to get this dude. He would not fold. This dude did it. Like Kelly did it. He was probably the only one that was right in the room in hindsight.
Yep.
Whether that was from just ignorance from the other people or truly
Mhm.
just brainwash, which I think was just they were brainwashed.
Yep.
Um, Kelly June. I mean, that's the end of the first trial. Finally, hung jury.
Mhm.
Second trial happens. It is concluded on November 24th, 1917. Final verdict, not guilty. And from that point forward, that was pretty much the day that. I mean, that was it. He went on to die. It's kind of funny. Ed talked about it with me. Talked about it with a few other people on the Villisca subreddit, a very small group. Shout out
Yep.
to them, by the way. You guys have been great supporters. The few people that have been communicating with me. Uh, it was pretty unknown what happened to Kelly. He just kind of vanished. Like he just went under
Yep.
the radar. He ended up
Yep.
moving to New York, and he's buried with his wife Laura in the Bronx borough of New York City. He actually died in an insane asylum after his wife
Mhm.
Laura passed,
Yep.
and that was it. And but there was one other thing I wanted to say before we end here. I was watching an interview, and I like to watch the one of the things I love is the ghost hunts in the Villisca case. I don't even watch them for that. I sort from newest. I filter the videos.
Yep.
Newest Villisca, like self-made paranormal
Mhm.
YouTube channels. But
Yep.
sometimes these videos incorporate the tour guide tour, and the
Yes.
people that give these tours, they hear stuff no one else hears. There
Mhm.
was one, and I highly advise you to look it up because it's very interesting. They it's like a 4 hour video, but they talked to Johnny Hauser for like an hour and 30 minutes. It's very professional, this guy. It's called like Paranormal Files.
Okay.
Very professional, a couple million subscribers. But Johnny Hauser said something in this interview I've never heard from anyone. And Ed was even kind of skeptical because he could be mixing it up with something that was involving Jones, which we won't get into, about letters that were discovered that had no context. But I don't remember how it went fully. But Johnny Hauser said he was talking to a local, uh, that her grandfather in town was a part of the Presbyterian Church. Like, and in 19, right before Kelly's death in the 1950s, Kelly wrote a letter or something confessing to the whole thing. And the Presbyterian Church of Villisca got this letter, and they were pretty much given a choice to go public with it or reignite. Because I mean, it's getting more and more, the flames dwindling more and more as time passes on about just detaching from it. It's a lot of that's come from the past 20 years. The more it's been more focused on just the paranormal, it's helped to kind of
Mhm.
the flame die down, the drama, and just letting people just being tired of it in Villisca, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But 1985, this letter comes to notice,
Hmm.
and they're up in the Presbyterian group of town is given a choice whether they go public with this letter or they don't. To Because they don't want to reignite the feud with the Methodists of town because it wasn't dead fully yet. They decide to burn this letter. I mean, you can, and I'm like, why? But if this is coming from a local of town and and their father, that where they heard this story from being their father, where they heard this story from, that was part of the Presbyterian Church. Why would he make that up? I mean, I just think it's
Yeah.
very. I think it was more so they didn't want to bring attention back to Villisca. But if that letter did exist,
Yep.
if Johnny's not mixing up a story and this local is in town,
Mhm.
one day I hope to go to Villisca, and I that will be one of my goals is to figure out who said that and to talk
Yeah.
to him. Because
Yeah.
if this letter did exist, that's our answer. That is our answer. I believe in
Yes.
people that hold on to stories like that hear it
Mhm.
from somebody like their father.
Yep.
Um, I think that's in terms of Kelly. I think if he did send that right before he died, I think that's him just like trying to go out in forgiveness. I don't know. I look at
Yeah.
Kelly as I think he knew there was a God, as insane as he was, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to. I believe he's rotting, but
Yeah.
regardless, I don't think
He,
he
he
want.
didn't want to. He didn't want to take it to the grave.
Yeah,
Those
and that
deals.
makes
Yeah.
sense to me. If Kelly did it, I don't think he's the type of guy that wouldn't eventually give a confession that wasn't forced out of him. I think he would eventually just give one.
Yeah. And you see a
Now,
lot of times too with serial killers or murderers or stuff like that, that they, at some point, they want to seek adoration or recognition of what they've done. So
yes,
he's dropping these little hints and he's talking about this and doing that. Like he almost wanted to get caught to be recognized. Like, look what he did. Just to get
yeah,
that adoration. So I mean, yeah. Overall, like say you talked about how couldn't he have been drenched in blood? Well, I say he was staying just down the street. I think
true.
that parsonage. He was just up the road. That church is just on the corner. If you go there, the church is.
But another thing that's interesting,
He could just case closed. But
one of the things that does support the serial killer theories, I don't believe Xenia Delaney. I don't know if you know about that if you've read the book.
right,
You may not instantly remember it.
yeah,
And I talked about this in my first episode of my podcast. Which highly advise you just to check it out. I don't know if you've listened to it. It's a long, it's more of like a podcast where you listen just like this one. This episode's going to be even longer. I don't expect people to listen all the way through. More just, segments,
yeah,
when they're
yep,
listen to a whole episode and you get done with it by like a week or two or whatever.
hmm
Um, but Xenia Delaney was a telephone operator in Villisca the night of that murder. And this is where it does support the serial killer. I'm like, well, I don't think Kelly would do this. She wakes up to someone trying to break into the telephone booth. It's a hallway, it's a door. He opens the door, he goes through this hall. It's like an apartment now, or it's torn down. The building might be torn, or the staircase is torn down where he got up into
okay.
this room. He tries to open the door and it's not opening. It's around 2:10 in the morning. I brought Ed on for the first episode, and we talk about this at the very beginning of my interview with him. Check it out. And that supports a double event. Like I think this was out of all nights, she's awoken the night of the murders, and it stuck with her, and she spoke about it
Yeah.
in the inquest. Like this wasn't something she just brought to life 4 years later.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there was definitely some odd stuff going on in Villisca, that night. Again, talk about the street lights weren't on
yeah,
because of an issue with who was getting
the
paid.
municipal power company. Yeah, it
Right. So
was.
you had this perfect storm of circumstances that led to, you get this guy that's trying to get in, then you got the murders, the lights weren't on. If they had the street lights been on, maybe someone would have saw something, whatever. It was all just kind of a perfect storm of
Well,
events
and
that
I
led to
look at it
this.
like, and this is where people will probably think I'm crazy. I'm such a deep thinker. There's certain things that are meant to be a mystery. You look at JFK,
Yeah.
there's weird circumstances there. You look at Zodiac, how the one time he would have been caught, he's just not because he's misidentified when he walks past police officers. There's certain things I just think that are meant not to be solved, whether that's to move progress police investigation, work in the future, to learn from mistakes. Um, but I do think Villisca falls into that category. I think it's something it's brought people together in a way to like I wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for this case. And
Right.
there has been out of all the morbidness, and you wish it didn't happen, but
Hmm.
there has been the slightest good that's come out of it, and giving people passion to try to find the truth.
Yep.
And it sounds messed up because of how bad it is, and I would do
Right.
anything to. Obviously, the way I'm
Right.
just saying, I wish it didn't happen. Yeah, I'd rather have that,
Yeah.
but I try to look
But
for
it's
the good in
based
everything.
on, yeah, so based on this case, all the mistakes that were made, they didn't people out of the house. I mean, normally in a situation like that, we would go there to see like, oh, we'd make sure there's no one else alive in the house, whatever, and then we would seal that thing off.
Yep.
Know what anyone that goes in, their name gets written down and the time they went in. So all these advances in law enforcement investigation have come from like, hey, look at Villisca. I mean, and that now we don't look at Villisca today, but back in like say the 1920s, 30s, moving forward, I'm sure they looked at how bad that was
Yes.
and said, "Hey, we can't allow this to happen because look what happened. We never solved it. We didn't find
That's
the guy
and
who
that's
did it."
that's the good I try to take out of it.
Yep.
I do think that there's stuff that happens and
Hmm.
that's just not never gonna fully make sense. I think people
Yep.
like to cases that go unsolved. Why does stuff happen? No matter what you believe in, it's like everyone's going to die,
Yep.
and they will meet their maker.
Yep.
Regardless of what
Yep.
you believe,
Yep.
this world has a maker.
Yep.
Regardless of your religion, I'm not pushing it. Like there,
Yep. No, I
and,
no, I
and
get it.
there will be a final judgment. And
Yep.
people that get away don't even match to comparison about
Say
what they will
say
what they
do they really get away?
yeah,
No, they don't because
absolutely not.
they pay
Yeah.
for it at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Lance, man, it's been a pleasure, and
Yeah.
if I've talked to you before, and I just let the viewers know, if I ever come across, I would let you know beforehand,
Hmm.
in terms of like, so you could research it. Like
Hmm.
one of the other, cases, if I have trouble finding someone to be a guest for one of like the niche cases of the five,
Hmm.
we could have, and it'd be a much shorter interview, I'm sure, with
Yeah.
one of those, but love
Yeah.
to just have someone on to bounce ideas off of. You could be my
Yeah.
guy for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I'd love that.
I don't like nagging Ed too much because he's done so much, and I've talked to him
Oh,
so many
yeah.
times, and I
Yeah.
feel like you're more, I feel like it's more reasonable to ask, you ask you, and
Yeah.
it's not as much of a pain for you either with
No.
joining. You understand technology a bit better, so.
Yeah, no, listen, I love this. This has been great. And if we have enough time here, just I'll give you my synopsis on the whole thing. I've kind of looked things over.
Dude, absolutely,
So basically,
yeah,
after
go
after
away.
reading stuff, talking to Ed, looking at everything, knowing what I know in law enforcement now, basically why I believe Kelly did it is that you had a guy that was crazy. He was weird. He cloaked himself in God and religion. Um, he was impotent. He was jealous, and um, it just was a crime of opportunity. A lot of times. Criminals that commit crimes, it's an opportunity thing. It's not like they plot and plan. I don't think George Kelly planned this. I think it was a crime of opportunity. Like something hit him. He saw this beautiful family all together having fun, something he could never have. They go back there. He sees where they go. I don't believe in the attic theory. There's a theory about that someone hid in the attic. I don't buy that. Looking at everything, small towns even today that I work in, people leave their doors unlocked today in 2025. In 1912, in a small town, I can't imagine how many people left their door unlocked. I believe it was that simple of a thing where he watched them go home. They didn't live from where he was staying. They lived just down the street, so it wasn't far.
Hmm.
And I think that even before they went to bed, he was down there watching them, like a peeping tom does. And I'm just not going to be moved from that. I think he saw him. He had this pulse, this impulse, this urge that he couldn't suppress, and went down there and did what he did. He gave a confession, or almost two confessions, if that letter is true. Um, why he wasn't covered in blood. I mean, there's had been blood all over that house. I mean, Ed talked about that blood in the shoe. I mean, there had been blood all over that house. To me, I think he just walked back down the street, cleaned up, changed clothes, got on the train, and he was gone. That's just my personal feeling about it. It makes sense to me. It may not to others, but that's what I think happened. It was just a crime of opportunity, jealousy, obsession, sexual deviancy. And it's just an urge he couldn't suppress. And so
Yeah,
and again, I think it was just as simple as, and everyone back then had an axe laying around. That was a pretty common tool to chop
that's what they
wood,
say. Yeah.
to chop coal, stuff like that. I know that's what they said Ross used that for, was to uh, chip coal and stuff like that to put it in their wood burning stove or whatever they had. Um, but it was just laying there, and he was probably looking in the window, watched him go to bed, and then saw that axe and said, "Oh," and then just let himself in. Um, how long he waited, we'll never know. But I don't think, they said the stairs are really noisy. How could they not wake somebody up? When I go to bed at night, unless something's really loud, I don't wake up.
Yeah.
So I think someone just ascending those stairs real softly wouldn't have woken up anybody. Do I believe he did the parents first, Joe and Sarah? I believe he did. That's the
Yeah.
biggest threat. You take them out first, then make your way around. But again, did he take his shoes off? If you walk in socks, your instead of shoes, your foot doesn't hit the floor near as hard
That's
to make that much noise.
true.
So did
That's
did he slip
true.
his did he take his shoes off and then just kind of weasel his way through the house and do it? No one knows. There should have been footprints somewhere. As much blood that was spilled, he couldn't have avoided stepping in all that
Well,
blood.
they did say there were a couple I've heard from like third party
Mm.
articles that yeah, there were like my grandma said there were a footprint on the I'm sure but it's like what do you do with that? It's like
You'd have to find the right person, start comparing shoes, but whatever. But no, that's what I think. I think he did it, and it was just a crime of opportunity. I don't think he was going around killing a bunch of people left and right in different towns. Could it be? Yes. But I just looking at
yeah.
everything with the bloody shirt, him being in town, so we can put him there. His confession, possibly two confessions. Just his obsession with the case. A lot of times people that are arsonists, when there's a house fire, the arsonist is probably one of those people that are watching. There's that dynamic
Hmm.
too. So he wanted to know what was going on, knowing what he had done, and so that's an alarming thing too. But I think that all feeds into it, and the fact that he was talking about it before it was even discovered. He was one of those things where he kind of almost wanted to get caught and say, "Look what I did."
Yeah.
You know, um, just like an arsonist
We
does when they go
see
back to
that.
the scene of a fire. They go back and they're just like, "Oh yeah," it excites them to an extent.
And we see that too, for
Yeah.
sure, with people
Yeah.
like getting themselves caught because they want recognition.
Yes. And so anyway, that's my theory on Villisca. Unless something were to come out tomorrow where it's like, oh, we have absolute proof that this person did it back in 1912, would I change my mind? But no, he's just the perfect guy for it. He was in Villisca that night, and when Ed told me, he goes, "What are the odds you had a serial killer that was that crazy in town, along with a guy that's obviously crazy like George Kelly?" Um,
Yeah.
it's almost too much to
It is.
say.
It
Yeah.
is. It's too, and that's the thing. It's like simple is better on all these cases. You see the Idaho murders that are going on, where he finally took his plea. He's
Yeah.
finally pleading to avoid the death penalty.
Yeah.
It's just you still have people like supporting this conspiracy. Oh, he wasn't the only one that did it. With Delphi, it was going on. Oh, he's this guy's being framed. Some
Hmm.
people just love mystery. Like as much as they're, oh, we want justice for these people. No, you just like things being a mystery. You don't want things to be truly solved.
Yes.
Simple is usually the answer 99.9% of the time. And
Yeah.
that's what I think it comes down to with Villisca.
Yeah.
Um,
And they
the
made a
bottom
movie
line.
that someone came out with a movie here that's been like 2018 or so, um, called Villisca.
Oh, I've
And
seen it. Yeah.
that movie is so off base.
It's it
It kind
it's
of made me sick because it doesn't.
it's a horrible movie, by the way.
It's
Don't
almost like an insult to Ed's book. I mean, it's terrible. It's
the
not even
only
close to
the
what happened.
oh it's that movie. I would put that movie on like that's one of those like Avalanche like Sharknado like that movie
Yeah,
is terrible. Like it's just
yeah,
genuine. Even if it was right, it's just a genuinely off.
yeah, yeah,
Off. If you want to watch a bad movie, watch
yeah.
the Axe Murders of Villisca. Just
Villisca,
watch
yeah, it was
awful
terrible.
movie. And
And there's also when I was doing all this research and stuff like that, and then I saw that how bad that movie was. I said, wouldn't it be great if you could make a movie about Villisca that was more accurate? Again, I don't want to profit from this tragedy at all, but
oh, it would be.
I think the story deserves, even if it's in a horror flick or whatever, it deserves to be told correctly
Oh, it would be. I mean,
and
it would be
depicted
amazing,
accurately.
or
Yeah.
even just a historic fiction sense,
Right.
where like kind of like
Yeah.
morning. Apparently, the book's awful. Ed and I, but Morning Ran Red, that was like the fictional book of the case. It's very like
Right.
off base though, like
Hmm.
the movie that just came out like
Yeah.
6 years ago was.
Right. Yeah.
But
It's not
I have been
accurate.
saying it's a morbid idea for a show, but like even just like a transient that has figured out how to break the system and is always on the run
Yeah.
and kind of like just no one knows that he's doing the things he's doing. I
Yeah.
mean, the whole story of it would make a great show, or I mean, just the aftermath from the starting point to
Yeah.
the aftermath. I mean, it's fascinating how it divided this
Yeah.
town.
Oh, it did. Yeah. And like I say, and even today, people don't really want to talk about it. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
that's all that counted. They don't want Villisca to be known as this is
and it
the home
will.
of Max murders and this tragedy. But unfortunately, it's going to be,
Yeah, it's
nothing will ever change that. It is the one of the worst murders in U.S. history that
yeah.
did go unsolved. And I talked to Ed about this too. I said, man, I said, there's no electricity in the house. I said, whoever was in there, and I believe it was Kelly, they turned the lantern down low or whatever, but still to be able to hit people with an axe where you want to hit them. I mean, it's hard to swing an axe. I mean, to hit where you want to hit is difficult. That's what supports the serial killer theory. Like the guy with the
Yeah.
axe and stuff like that, that slept with it and all that. He was an expert with his weapon, but um, you know, just how that all happened, and no one got woken up. You would think if you're laying in bed next to your wife that she gets hit in the head with an axe, it would move the
Well,
bed, or
that's
there
that.
would be something. And so that's why this case kind of just sucks me in, because I'm like, everything had to work out perfectly for him to get in there, get it done, and not get caught or wake anybody up. And it's just like, how does that
Well,
happen?
I do have a hard time though, and we're not going to start another week because we're about done here.
Yeah.
But
No.
I do have a hard time believing. I do think people woke up. I think it probably was the children. I think Sarah Moore woke up. I would on
Hmm.
Hill. She's
Hmm.
probably shot up. Everything. It just and we don't know, and there can be a hard time believing it, but it just doesn't make sense where she was struck, and then I think almost the precision of how this killer perfected like the cuts on her face. It's like that
Right.
was like and she was the only one hit with the sharp part. That was like an extra FU for
Yeah.
waking up and interrupting me. But the kids, like people are like, why didn't the kids like if I were, I would have just ran out of the house. People that say that type of shit piss me off because it's
Yeah.
like, you wouldn't have. You're a little kid. You're gonna freeze. You're an innocent child. You're not gonna know what to do. You're gonna be in like, what the hell's going on? I believe at least Lena and Ina, if they weren't, some of the kids woke up and didn't know what to do and they just accepted their fate in shock. They didn't know what was going on. You
Yeah.
hear that? I can imagine how loud it was.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, but you're not going to look like you awoken up if you didn't get out of bed, and that's what happened.
Right. Yeah, it looks like everyone didn't wake up, or I mean, if someone did, it was very brief. But again,
Yeah,
how confused are you when you wake up out of a dead sleep? Especially at that
exactly.
hour. I mean, it's like you're like, what? like, even if you woke up, you probably didn't know
Exactly.
what was about to happen. That's just my take on it.
Exactly. But yeah, Lance, I mean it's been a pleasure and
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work you've done. Like I say, it's encouraging to see someone younger than me involved in this and doing all the work you're doing and investigating. I think that's
well,
great.
it's definitely a I always laugh. My pop always says like I'm the weirdest dude ever because you meet me and I'm a normal guy. I don't really go around saying, yeah, dude, I study brutal axe murders that
There's,
happened. Like
yeah,
it sounds so morbid, but out of all my other hobbies, I'm just like another guy. But
yeah,
it has been amazing to get this project up and running, and
yeah,
even just for it's one of those things where one day I'll be done with it, and it'll
mm,
always be found by someone new that's
oh yeah,
researching the case,
yeah,
and people will be watching. I hope even 10 years from now when they're just browsing and have
yep,
been long done with the show. So
yep,
I appreciate you for getting on, and who knows, you could be on
yep,
again if the
yeah,
time comes. I would love to bring you
yep.
on again. You've been
No,
amazing.
yep,
Uh,
you as well. And if you ever watch this, Ed, if you're watching this down the road, just again, thank you, Ed,
I
for
hope you
everything
watching.
you've
I
done.
bet.
Everything you've done, I really appreciate it, and we wouldn't be where we are today without you. So,
I wouldn't be, yeah, we wouldn't be making the show. No one would know
yep,
half the stuff they do.
yep,
And I kind of dedicate half this to Ed just because, dude, it's
yep,
awesome.
yep,
But yeah, man, you have a great day, and
yeah, you
I
as well.
thank you so much for coming on.
Yep, thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Yeah, we'll talk to you later. Bye
See
bye.
you later.